Good afternoon. I'm going to call to order Environmental Matters Committee meeting for September 18th and take a roll call. Everybody, for the record, everybody is here from the committee. I'd like to, first of all, I guess I'll take a motion to approve the agenda, but I do have a few amendments before we. I'd like to amend it to add. Well, first of all, I want to amend it to remove R3619, which is the critical area legislation. Well, it's the fees associated with the critical area. I've reviewed it, have a number of comments. I just wanted to talk with Plan and Zoning first and the Critical Area Commission before I brought something back to the committee. So, and Plan and Zoning has told us there's no super rush to this legislation. So I'd like to, if everybody's good with that, remove that from the agenda for at least a month.
All right, but you should know that Finance recommended approval this morning, so we'll have to make sure it doesn't get on the council agenda before.
For the fees.
Right.
Is there any problem, Dr. Nash, with the fees, or do you need those through sooner rather than later?
No, there's no problem, but it does just codify what we do now. So I don't know if you want it. So it might be easier to go ahead and move on it. Although yesterday when Rolls postponed it, I wasn't paying attention. So it's sort of an independent resolution from the ordinance that I think is what you want to talk about, the actual ordinance itself, right, not the resolution. So you could, the resolution I don't see as being a big deal because it's just codifying what we do now.
So it's not codified?
That's right.
Okay.
As far as the fees we charge in 21 for 21.
Where do you get the?
We
how do you
use
base
the fee from 17.
Okay.
There's not actually a code reference to the associated fees. It's just in an application form we have now.
Okay. Well, I do have thoughts on the fee. I'd like to explore getting those, because I know the critical area fees, if you calculate them out based on acre, it's a lot lower than the new Forest Conservation Act fees. And so I'd like to look at increasing the critical area fees associated with that with the overall legislation. But I haven't had a chance to sit down and I want to get feedback from everybody before
I see. In that case, it makes sense to postpone.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Will there be a fiscal analysis on that or staff report?
Well, right now it's the same. So I think they're working on the fiscal note, but it would just say it's the same as it is now because that's what we charge.
Okay.
Obviously, if there's an amendment and it is increased, then that would have a fiscal note.
Thank you.
All right. I would also like to add four business items to the agenda. A new A, which would be a report from directors regarding restoration project process. And if I have my letters right, a new F, which would be a report from the Office of Environmental Policy Director. A new item H, which would be a report from the Annapolis Environmental Commission. And then a business item I, which would be a report from Annapolis Green. And otherwise, that'd be no other change.
I move that we accept the changes.
As amended.
Do you have them?
You have report from the director, OEG, and
Environmental Commission, and then Annapolis Green.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And what do we have next? Approval of the minutes.
Move approval of the minutes.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you again, Takia.
Thank you, Takia.
Thank you. And we have an appointment I'd like to deal with as well. So let's see, we have Mr. Rowell. Could you please come on up? So you see Mr. Rowell is being nominated for appointment to the Environmental Commission, which has, and if the Environmental Commission wants to come up as well. How many vacancies do you have on the committee? Oh, I guess Hillary, he'd know. How many vacancies are on the commission?
I think it's just 2.
I believe it's just 2 now,
2 lots. Okay, the counting.
soon to be 1,
Okay,
hopefully.
all right.
Is that correct?
Excellent. Well, Mr. Rao, could you thank you for your interest. Really impressed with your resume. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in serving?
Yes, I have been a lifelong member of Annapolis. I was born and raised here. My family's been here for over 175 years. I have always had an intention or want or desire to be a part of the Environmental Commission ever since I started my career as an environmental scientist. I went to Broadneck High School, played on a golf team, played on a football team. Went to University of Maryland Eastern Shore for my undergraduate degree in social science, and played basketball there, Division I basketball. Also was the editor-in-chief of my newspaper, et cetera, et cetera. Went on to my master's degree, which is an Executive Master's of Natural Resources. That's from Virginia Tech through the Center for Leadership and Global Sustainability. Also, I'm a global environmental consultant, having worked and lived in India in 2017 for a research visa I was there for, doing a study on water quality and water scarcity in India and how to build community capacity to solve environmental issues. I also was the first ever diversity and inclusion coordinator for the Department of Natural Resources in 2018. Middle of 2017, 2018, and worked there for a while at DNR, right, not too far from here. Let's see, I played played in the D League for the NBA for a while till I tore my Achilles tendon, and that was the end of that.
Yeah.
Tried out for the 76ers. I've done a lot of things with sports, etc. I also worked for the Boys and Girls Club for 9 years as a director of Teen Services, Director of Community Engagement and Outreach, and a Program Manager. And I've ran my own facility at Annapolis Gardens when they finished their renovations. I was the director of that facility when they opened that up. I've done I have my own grant and proposal writing firm, Art and Associates. We do a lot of environmental grants, research and things like that. Most recently, I was a part of the grant that was written for Asbury Broadneck United Methodist Church for the ephemeral restoration of their cemetery, which had major flooding, and that was the largest amount ever awarded in the state of Maryland for an environmental restoration on a historic African American church site, and that was for $620,000, and that was through a couple of different funding sources that helped out with that. Let's see, I'm a direct descendant of Harriet Tubman. My 6th great-grandfather, Reverend Samuel Green, was one of the visionary founders of Morgan State University. He was also one of the visionary founders of University of Maryland Eastern Shore, which I later found out after I went there. But the church that he started in both of those in Baltimore City later became Morgan State University. My father is also a professor at Morgan State. My sister went to Morgan, et cetera, et cetera. And I have 2 children, Kingston and Hillary. They are 7 and 10. I currently now am a science teacher, teaching my 3rd year at MacArthur Middle School, which is an IB World School on the Fort Meade base in Fort Meade. And I chose that selection because of my background as a global environmental consultant to work at an IB World School, so that I could bring that experience to the kids at the school, having worked and lived in another country halfway across the world. Yeah, that's just
Well, thank you.
about it.
So what community, where do you live in the city?
I live in Eastport. I live in the Watergate Apartments. Been living there for almost about a year now.
Excellent. And for your Watershed Stewardship, I see you're a Watershed
left
Steward.
that out, yes.
So what was your project?
I had actually did 3 capstone projects. We were only required to do 1. One was the project at Mount Olive Church with Reverend Calhoun, who has been a big mentor and partner of mine for many years now. We did basically a maintenance project on his campus because they already had a installation there. So we did some maintenance with that. I also worked instrumentally with the READY program, restoring the environment and developing youth. I put together the training for the youth to get cultural competency training, as well as diversity and things that deal with the watershed installations. I also have a Master Watershed Stewards Academy certification from Anne Arundel County. That was in 2015. And I also have an executive citation from the county exec from my work around education and watershed restoration as well. And,
excellent.
that's how that came.
Well, excellent. And so do you have anything in mind in terms of specific projects you want to work with the Environmental Commission on?
Well, right now, currently, I am very strongly working with MAYO, Maryland Association for Environmental and Outdoor Education. I've been working with them for a couple years now. They've been sending me to different events and excursions, speaking engagements. I go around speaking to youth to get them excited and geared up around careers around natural resources and STEM. I'm set to go to the North American Association for Environmental Education Conference in 2019. That's going to be in Kentucky next month. I'll be speaking there. I also am set to go to another conference in West Virginia, the Watershed Forum. So what I would specifically maybe think that maybe a good fit for me in this role would be somehow seeing how we can vamp up our efforts to encourage more diverse populations and ethnicities to get into careers around natural resources and STEM and environmental education. I don't know if you know, but I'm sure you do. Maryland was the first state in the country to have a mandate for environmental education and literacy. And so as a result of that, I've been kind of hitting the ground running in that regard.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm sure you and I could probably stay here all evening and chat,
Yes,
but
yes.
if my colleagues have any questions.
Sure. Are those your children?
Yep.
Oh, do you want to stand up?
This is Hillary. Wow, Hillary Wow. She likes makeup and doing hair. This is Kingston Rao. He's a football player, basketball player, soccer player, golf player. He likes to swim, and he's also an artist as well.
I think, along with everything else, your knowledge of the state, federal, and regional TMDL and MS4 compliance will come in very handy.
Yes.
With our stormwater management.
Yeah, I worked implementing the 2014 Watershed Agreement with the Chesapeake Bay program. I was a part of the original team for the Diversity Action Work Group through the EPA. And so we've done a lot of work with that in the past 5 years since it started. And I was on one of the original founding members of that development team. So I've done a lot of work with them.
Alderman Arnett, do you have anything?
So I was worried when I read his resume that he was grossly overqualified, and now he's admitted to us that he's got a disability. I move that we recommend approval.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Burnham.
Thank you.
So cute.
All right, next up on the agenda, we have staff report on the restoration efforts.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I'm Teresa Sutherland, the city manager, and with me this afternoon is Dr. Sally Nash, the acting director of planning and zoning, David Gerald, the director of public works, and Jackie Guile, the director of the Office of Environmental Policy. At your last Environmental Matters Committee meeting, there was a group of 4 individuals who came up and testified about difficulties that they believed they had encountered in their processes for watershed restoration projects. And so as a result of that, I have asked the staff to review how we might revamp our processes to address the concerns that were raised by those 4 individuals. I will let David Gerald start, and we will address those concerns that were raised.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, David Gerald, Director of Public Works. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about these subjects. We appreciate that opportunity. So I reviewed the tape from the last meeting several times, and it seemed to me there was 4 general themes that each of the speakers discussed. So I'd just like to address each of those themes. So the first was the relationship between city staff and the restoration project teams. I'm going to read some of these comments because I just want to make sure that I don't leave out some of the information that I otherwise would if I'm just talking off the top of my head. So the role of my staff for projects that include grading work and stormwater management is regulatory, ensuring compliance with the laws and regulations pertaining to the projects. When DNEP was disestablished back in 2016, its functions and responsibilities were assigned to planning and zoning and public works. Many of the high-profile projects that have been discussed at Environmental Matters, including St. Luke's, the Bywater project, and the Spot Creek restoration project, were principally reviewed and permitted by DNEP. So for these important restoration projects, it's important that the standards be met, and that in addition to the environmental issues, which are obviously very important, and were discussed by DNR when they were here, that the focus is on the environmental aspects, but we're also concerned about public safety, flood protection, right-of-way protection, constructability, and very importantly, maintainability, because these projects come over the city after they're completed, after a certain maintenance period that the restoration companies take care of, then they come over to us. So we're concerned about maintainability. So it's important to note that the relationship between the permit applicants and permit reviewers is the same for these projects as for all projects that come into the city. So we don't differentiate between these projects and development projects or city projects or residential or whatever the case might be. The reviewers are tasked with ensuring that all standards and regulations are met. They do not serve as advocates for these projects, for any of these types of projects. In my opinion, it's not appropriate for a regulatory reviewer to also be the project advocate responsible for expediting the project. There's an important distinction between advocating for projects and having regulatory authority over the projects. Currently, the advocate for environmental projects is the Office of Environmental Policy. Since that office doesn't have regulatory authority over the projects, they're ideally suited to be the advocates for the project and to assist with shepherding the projects through the city's review process. Irrespective of all of that, I think it's really important that the city staff and the applicants, no matter what type of project, that the relationship should always be professional and cordial. So that's the first theme. The second theme is the timeliness of the review of restoration projects. So I think it's well known that the city stormwater engineer is overworked and overtasked and ends up working probably 60 hours a week. As a result, the City Council approved a second stormwater engineer position as part of the FY20 budget. That has not been filled yet, but we've started the interview process. The stormwater engineer's responsibilities extend beyond the review of project plans and include investigating and writing reports for flooding, sediment erosion control, and illicit discharge issues. Because of the workload of permit reviews, the review of grading plans does not occur and has not occurred as quickly as we would like. So we acknowledge that. This is expected to improve with the second stormwater engineer. The other important thing to remember is grading permits are reviewed on a first-come, first-served basis. So as projects come in, they get into a queue and they work their way through the queue. Neither city projects nor restoration projects are moved to the front of the queue for review. At this time, there are many residential and development projects that are coming in for grading permits. Those applicants expect a timely review for all of those projects and are equally vocal and equally unhappy when their projects are delayed. No one's happy with delays in the project permits due to the backlog of projects to be reviewed. Again, we hope and expect that that will improve with the second stormwater engineer. The third theme had to do with some of the issues associated with the standard operating procedures checklist that we developed. So in the past, the city was criticized for having a complicated, unwritten process for restoration projects. In response, Planning and Zoning, Public Works, and Environmental Policy jointly developed an SOP for these projects. And we discussed that to some degree back in June at the Environmental Matters meeting, and it was well received when we talked about it. At the July Environmental Matters meeting, there were comments about the city attempting to follow the new SOP for a project that had already received funding. The SOP is an effort to provide both the applicant and the city reviewers with a defined roadmap for environmental projects, allowing for a more efficient and effective process for both parties. Just for your information, the following are the 6 phases, just so you're aware of how this is set up. So phase 1 is a pre-application meeting. So we like to meet with the nonprofit groups before they submit applications for grants, just to understand what the project scope is and some of the details of the project. And then there's a site visit made after the application goes in. And then there's an MOU or MOA that's developed, and that was the subject of a lot of the discussion. But the purpose of that is to assign responsibilities of the applicant and city for the finished project, including review and approval of the grant, if applicable, by the City Council's Budget and Finance Committee. So we like to bring those because the city's taken on some liability for those projects if the grant's approved and the project is completed, and then it'll come over to the city for maintenance. The second phase is preliminary plan submission. So that's 30% drawings that are submitted for review. Phase 3 is public outreach. So we want to make sure that the residential community or the businesses that are surrounding the project are aware of it and typically sign letters of intent to allow the projects to take place on their property. The next phase, phase 4, is final plan submission, 60% plans. Phase 5 is then issuance of permits, and phase 6 is post-construction. So as-built drawings, post-construction maintenance, and monitoring. So each step in the SOP is important, but not all steps may apply to each project, and we understand that. And if there are steps and phases that don't apply, then environmental policy, as the advocate for these projects, can work those issues out, and then we can skip certain steps in the process. So Jackie and I have recently met with restoration contractors to discuss the SOP and to share ideas on improving the process. It's a living document. It's not cast in stone. If there's a better way to do things, we're happy to do that. As a result of these meetings, we're modifying the SOP slightly to add in-person meetings to discuss review comments. So the way it's been happening is we review the plans, we send back comments, they respond to those comments, and then potentially we respond to those comments and they respond back, and it can become a sort of an ugly loop, as you can imagine. So what we've done is we started for the Back Creek project an in-person meeting. So we provide comments to those, we provide responses to those, I take that back. So we provide the comments that you heard about in the July meeting. They responded to those comments, and then we had a meeting to go through all of those comments to discuss them and hopefully head off all the back and forth and back and forth. We think that that's a positive change that will help expedite the projects. The next theme is the number of comments received, which that's a good segue into that one. So the number of comments received for reviewed plans. There was a lot of discussion that the number that they received for Back Creek was too many. Although DNR said that they were all meaningful comments, they just felt like it was too many comments. So for all grading permits, high-quality project plans improve and speed up the review and approval process. Unfortunately, it seems like many of our design engineers use our review process for quality control of their plans, and And Rotary, I'm sure you're aware of the QC that needs to go into plans before they're ever submitted to the agency. It appears not just for these restoration projects, because I don't mean to limit it to that, but for all of the projects that we're receiving, the design engineers aren't doing a great job of QCing their plans before they submit them, which means that we end up doing that because we find all those errors that their own QC process should have found. Many of the problems should have been corrected before the plans were submitted. Again, the situation's gotten worse for all permit plans, not just restoration plans. The discussion at the last Environmental Matters was that the city was trying to delay or sabotage projects by providing too many review comments for the grading plans. This is not true. It's patently untrue. The DNR representative also said that all comments on the Back Creek project were meaningful, but just too many. Again, high-quality engineering plans that meet engineering and city standards do not receive dozens of comments. When there are numerous review comments, that's more indicative of poor plans rather than poor reviewers. So I mentioned that we've had meetings with the restoration contractors. So at least one of those meetings, I guess Jackie and I were in with the restoration contractor, we sort of had an aha moment. At least I did. I'm not sure because I'm speaking for Jackie. But, you know, we realized that that there's sort of a conundrum in the city code regarding development projects, because the city code is set up for development projects and to provide very tight bounds around development projects, and that the restoration contractors have to live within those same bounds, even though the intent of those projects is very much different than what it is for development. So we think that we should at least look at ways to improve that situation in the code, and so Jackie and I and Planning and Zoning will take that on to work on it to see if we need maybe a separate code section to address restoration projects, or at least some way to not have to meet all the requirements for development for restoration projects. The last thing I want to talk about a little bit, and I handed out some highlighted correspondence, is the St. Luke's project. Because I've got many black eyes over that project, and we think it's a great project, and we think it's coming to an end, which is a good thing, that it's almost complete. But there's been a whole lot of criticism toward the city regarding that project. As I mentioned, most of the permitting work for the project was done prior to the disestablishment of DNAP. During the construction, my staff pretty quickly figured out that the contractor had no intention of building the project in accordance with the plans approved not only by us but by MDE and Army Corps of Engineers. So although we've been negatively portrayed as being uneducated and resistant to this restoration project, MDE and Corps of Engineers also had significant concerns, and so that's why I wanted to make sure that you saw the correspondence that I've given you. So I've highlighted portions of it. I'd just like to review them briefly, and I won't dig too much into this because I'm sure that this is very sensitive to all, but the first document that hopefully you have is a email from MDE dated Friday, August 17, 2018. And it starts out by saying, MDE authorization has not been provided for the structures beyond the July 2017 approved plans. During the site meeting, reference on June 12th, Mr. Beecraft stated that Underwood submitted the July 2017 permitting plan so they could get MDE authorization, but Underwood never intended to conduct the work as noted on the plans. MDE authorization has not been provided for additional work in the wetlands. MDE has not provided authorization for increase in the total disturbed area. The permittee has not responded to the MDE June 11th comments to the submitted modification plan. And the permittee has not corrected the violations of MDE laws noted in the MDE reports dated from March 23rd, 2018 to June 12th, 2018. The second document is an Army Corps of Engineers document that's dated October 19, 2018. It says on April 27, 2018, our office conducted a compliance inspection on the subject project authorized in the waters of the United States. During the field visit, we observed that your contractor, Underwood & Associates, did not construct the project according to the approved plans. During construction, Underwood & Associates filled the existing non-tidal wetland with sand and utilized it as a haul road, which is in non-compliance with the Department of Army permit. This action resulted in the loss of approximately 11,000 square feet of palestrewn forested wetlands. A second compliance inspection was conducted on September 21st, 2018. During this site visit, the Corps observed that non-tidal wetlands remained filled and several wetland trees had died off as a result of the project and now present a safety hazard. Additionally, the Corps has observed that much of the planted vegetation has not survived. To compensate for the loss of canopy cover in the area of the former non-tidal wetland, the Corps requires planting 64 trees and 96 shrubs. The Corps has determined that you're in non-compliance with your permit. To bring your project into compliance, please provide an accurate as-built report to include surveyed longitudinal profile by December 31st. So again, I don't mean to delve into the negative, but I feel like they delved into the negative towards us. And this was a project that had pretty significant issues that we were dealing with, and so I just wanted to make you aware of that. So with that, I will end my remarks and pass it to...
Yeah, I'm just thinking maybe we could save questions for the end after they all give their presentation.
Jackie, did you have any comments you'd like to add? And would you please tell the members of the committee who all you have met with since the last meeting to review, for example, how the county does it, how the Underwood and Associates, what recommendations they had, et cetera, so that they're aware of your meetings. Thank you.
That's what I'm planning to do, plus fill in a little bit from what David said. So first of all, I'll start with that. The day following the testimony from the group that came before the committee, I had a call from Claudia Dunnigan at DNR following up on that testimony, and we talked about, why she testified the way she did, what are her suggestions for improvement, et cetera. And then I subsequently spoke again with her, and then with Kevin Smith, who also testified, who's the chief of the Natural Resources Division at DNR. I also spoke with Alice Estrada, who is the ED at the Maritime Museum, who testified, and Crispy Craft on a couple of occasions. And then, as David mentioned, we met with him and had a very productive meeting. The gist of what they were saying, along the points David made, the 4 or 5 points he made, and they're feeling that projects were held up, delayed, we don't have the right staff on board with the right education. I assured all of the participants at the hearing that we did indeed have the right staff, they have the right training. They're constantly taking new training, especially with regard to stormwater and new best management practices, and that with the addition of the second stormwater engineer, who will have experience in stormwater restoration projects, that the process will move much more efficiently. I impressed upon them that Matt Waters, our existing stormwater engineer, is very backed up, and we very much need another stormwater engineer to move projects through more expeditiously. I also share with DNR the conversation that David and I had with Crispy Craft of Underwood and Associates, the contractor who testified, and that we are making improvements to our workflow. They appreciated that very much. I believe at a previous hearing, Betsy Love from the Severn River Keeper program testified also about problems she had run into with the St. Luke's project, and I followed up with the Severn River Keeper program with both Betsy Love and with Sarah Caldes, who is the River Keeper, to get their suggestions and to tell them that we indeed appreciate their work, the credits that are generated by their projects, that we continue to look forward to working with them, but everyone needs to understand that the projects have to meet not only the city code, but they have to meet state and federal requirements as well. And in some of these projects, it was MDE and the Army Corps of Engineers who had projects that were holding up the final project, wrapping it up or going on to the next phase. They understood that. One point that DNR also made to me was that they want the city to know that when they approve grant funds for a project, that they have done their own internal evaluation and deemed it a good project. I've expressed to them we appreciate that, and that is, but still we need to do our own review. But while they may have approved a project as a good project on paper, it's in the implementation that we sometimes run into problems. But that the city was taking steps and meeting with the groups who had testified and others to learn how we can do our jobs better. And as David said, we did find some points in the process in our workflow requirements where we can expedite the process a little bit. We did, in fact, have a meeting on one of the projects already, and we felt that it was very productive, and that circle that David is talking about with response and comment, where other things pop up and then you have to put it on paper and get a response back on paper, we're settled right there in the room. And on that particular project, we may need to have another meeting because that's the first time we've done it. And it worked very well, but it's a big project. So we're not wed, as David said, we're not wed to the steps that are on that workflow currently. We may need to have an additional meeting or two. It just depends on what the project and what it looks like and how it flows. One other point that we decided to add into that workflow that David did not mention is that part of the problem was that that people who testified identified was that they think that questions were answered in the field when an engineer comes out to look, or someone else from the city comes out to look at a project and ask questions, or during the initial site visit, they think that there's been some questions asked and answered, and then the city comes back and asks them again through the response and comment period. So what we suggested was that every time there is a site visit, and every time that we have a meeting with city staff and a group of either the contractors or the other people involved in the project, that they produce, not the city, but the group doing the project produces a summary of that meeting, whether it's a site visit or a meeting in-house. And that way they will disseminate the meeting minutes, and anyone who participated can comment on them and say, well, I heard this or I heard that, or we need to add this other issue that we identified or discussed. And that way we have on a record of what was actually discussed, what questions were asked, and what questions were already answered, so that the city isn't asking the same questions again, and the people involved with the project don't feel that they've already answered the question, they were allowed to do something. So it takes all that ambiguity and out of the whole process. And that has already been done for the first meeting that we mentioned with the Back Creek project. We met with the contractor and the participants, and they produced meeting minutes already. So I think that will really help with questions and any accusations of not being responsive on one side or the other. Let's see. Then when I spoke with the county people about what they were doing as far as the workflow, they don't have a workflow like we do, but one issue that Betsy Love raised when she testified was that the city could adopt what MDE has adopted, and it's an expedited kind of decision-making workflow, which is that if you're in the field and you make a change or want to make a change and you need the city's approval, the city has a period of time in which to respond. And depending on what kind of question is, they have a different response time. If the city doesn't respond within 45 days, for example, then they can go ahead and do what they propose to do. MDE is considering such an expedited question and answer workflow, but it has not been finalized. The county is not using that yet. Ms. Love testified that they are not. I verified they're not. But MDE is coming up with that very soon. They said probably very soon for them, 6 months perhaps. But they said in the meantime, they suggest that we look at what the county is doing as far as their response times and when a decision can be made in the field without approval, or a task can be pursued if the city doesn't respond within a certain amount of time. So I have that document, and David and I can look at that and decide if that's something that the city thinks that we should implement with regard to these types of projects. And then, let's see if there's anything else. With regard to the Back Creek project, Ms. Estrada testified that the memorandum of understanding had not been finalized yet, and at that time I explained that we had gone back and forth with it a little bit, that we needed Office of Law to sign off on it, and that when the attorney responsible came back from maternity leave, she would address that. And I followed up with that attorney, and she did actually address it sooner than her maternity leave, having she was doing a little bit of part-time work before she came back full-time, and she went ahead and just took care of it. And I explained to Ms. Estrada it'd be much faster than having a new attorney start on it. And I did a follow-up with Ms. Estrada twice in person and on the telephone, and she said she understood that, and that memorandum of understanding is now completed as far as the city is concerned. We're just waiting for sign-off from the Maritime Museum. They've looked at it, they're fine with it. I just need the hard copy back so that I can send it along its way for signatures within the city. So that issue is taken care of as well.
Jackie, would you clarify whether not having that memorandum of understanding executed before Ms. Leonard went on maternity leave in any way upheld or delayed the project?
Yes, it did not. And when it was out of order because the grant that funded the Mack Creek project was different from the types of grants we usually are dealing with. We're dealing with an applicant that first comes to us pre-application, as David mentioned, but this was a DNR discretionary fund grant, so there was never that opportunity for us to meet with the Maritime Museum staff or their contractor. So they got the money and then it was go run with it. So our workflow process was out of sync. So we didn't have a memorandum of understanding before they actually started their work. But we made sure that the Maritime Museum and their contractors were aware, we reiterated it several times, that in no way, shape, or form would their project be held up, and we would continue to review it and move it along, and that has been the case.
And that was a project that had 50-some comments.
Right.
So even though the MOA wasn't completed, they had submitted the plans, we had reviewed the plans and provided comments.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Nash, did you have something you wanted to present on?
No, planning and zoning's role is primarily to make sure that the city's critical area program is being followed, and also liaisoning with the critical area commission, who oversees almost all of these projects, and we have to get approval from them if the city is a party to the work that's being done.
And City Manager, did you have something else you wanted to add?
I just want to say, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to address these comments. I wanted us to have a comprehensive response to the concerns raised and not an on-the-spot response. So I want to thank the staff and Director Gerald and Acting Director Nash and Director of Office of Environmental Policy Gerald for putting this together, for meeting with Underwood and Associates and the others, the county, talking to DNR, et cetera, to try and resolve some of these matters. I think as Ms. Gerald just testified, we have the right staff, we have the right training. We have modified our procedures based on the feedback we've gotten. We must comply with our code. We have no choice. So if there are 52 comments because to ensure code compliance, there's going to be 52 comments. However, we are looking at what code changes we might enact to apply a different requirement for restoration projects versus everything else. We don't plan to change the order in which we review projects that come in. So we're not going to, at this time, bump a residential development that's been submitted or any other project that's been submitted for review to give the environmental projects a priority, because those other constituents have just as much a right to expect a timely review of their plans. So if we want faster reviews, it means more staff. And we do hope that the second stormwater management engineer, but right now we don't plan to change the order in which we review the projects. I have tasked the Office of Environmental Policy and Director Gerald with being the advocate for these groups, for these projects that are trying to do projects that require our approval, that are going to help us achieve our TMDL goals and our other environmental goals. So I have tasked Ms. Gerald with being the advocate for these groups, while Director Gerald rightfully is handling the reviews and the compliance and regulatory matters. And I think that these meetings that we've set up, where we're now meeting back and forth, are going to greatly enhance that cooperation. That puts Jackie in the room as the advocate while it's happening, to hear the concerns of the applicants, to hear the responses from Public Works, and to try and navigate the waters to get things through more smoothly. I would like to say, as a group, we are willing to meet with whomever might have suggestions for how we can improve our processes or improve our code. It doesn't need to be, someone has to bring a matter to you publicly. They can pick up the phone and call me, or call David, or call Jackie, or call Sally, and we would be happy to set up those meetings of how we might do that to more effectively serve the constituents.
Thank you. And before I have brief remarks, I just wanted to, I can see Lynn from Annapolis Green. I think, do you have a time limitation?
The next one.
Okay. We'll get you on soon. And to my colleagues, I do want to try to keep this brief. We have a lot on the agenda still. But I do want to thank all of you for taking these comments seriously. I know there were some inaccuracies and overstatements, but I think there's also some validity to some of the comments. So, we don't get a choice on accepting or not accepting comments from the public. We still have to pass them along and treat them seriously. So thank you. I can tell, and thank you for taking steps to address some of the valid points that you have heard in that process. So with that, I'll open it up. Anybody in the committee has any questions for anybody?
Well, first of all, this is in my ward, so it's near to home. And I do thank you for completing the record, and I also appreciate it. It's happened under less than ideal circumstances, but it does seem like there's some good coming out of this, and I appreciate that. And actually had a conversation with Director Gerald recently, Gerald, about how restoration projects are different than other projects, so maybe we do need different rules. I am concerned, though, because as alderman, I got a lot of pressure on this project from neighbors, particularly from, what's the community, Severn House people. I hope we're not going to go through this with every stream restoration project. This one had a lot of complications over and above just sorting out the process and getting all of the permits done in the right direction. I think that some of the angst on this has to do with the fact that there's a lot of zeal out there, which I take as a positive thing, that there's a lot of people that want to get into doing these restoration projects, and there was sort of a militant righteousness on the part of the people doing the project, which is good and bad. But anything we can do, especially minimize, I'm still getting feedback from the neighbors, so anything we can do that's going to make that a little more palatable, I think would be a good thing. And I do appreciate your efforts, and this is sort of like a singe on the edge of really what should be a wonderful blossom, because I think the project is a good project, and really there were a lot of good things about it, and it's too bad this is sort of tainting around the edges.
Yeah, and we share your enthusiasm and energy and support for these projects. We just feel like there's things that we as a city need to look at and to review, but we're looking forward to working with Underwood. It looks like they're going to get the SPCA piece of stream restoration, and so we're already starting to have those discussions with them so that we can head off some of these issues that we had and get them working on the right track from the beginning. But and just to be clear, we heard a lot from Severn House too, and it wasn't positive. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, that they were very concerned about that project and the loss of trees and so forth.
And we have a former mayoral candidate living right next door to the SPCA, so maybe we can expect even more neighborhood comment.
Alderman Arnett, I just wanted to add that when these projects are pursued and when the applicant goes in for grant funding from the beginning, one of the questions is whether they have consulted neighboring properties. That's a requirement. So Severn Riverkeeper and the church, St. Luke's, did do that. And
I know they did.
And it's just that it's funny. It's always the people that didn't say anything when they were consulted the first time that when a project actually starts is when they come out of the woodwork. And I think all of their questions and issues have been addressed. And now that the project has gone in, St. Luke's is receiving favorable feedback from some of those residents.
Also,
Good,
the
I'm
same
glad
thing
you-
happens with legislation. People end up complaining after the public hearings. Any other comments or questions from the committee?
Yes.
Yeah,
Alderman
I
Turner?
just want to respond to Director Gerald's presentation, and I think the answers will be quick. So, as you know, every project, I mean, one of our biggest efforts is creating order out of chaos. And in looking at this and even the distribution here that I see, this was a perhaps maybe a small volume project, but it had a lot of people involved. So in your standard operating procedures, when you have that pre-app meeting, who is required to attend those?
I'll start and you can add to it. But usually at that point, it's just city people and whoever the potential applicant might be. So it's the group, it's usually the nonprofit group and maybe their contractor that meets to go over the project, the details, so that we have an understanding of what is going in before it actually goes in for a grant.
So, okay, and then that goes right into a site visit. And then the third, when you have this memo of understanding, I think of it more of like a responsibility matrix, if you will, right? Who's responsible for what? So how do you follow up with closure on that? Do you monitor that? I know we don't have time to do a forensics on this project, but I just see that some of this stuff probably didn't happen where you
I'm not sure if there was
assign
ever
responsibility and then you follow up weekly with.
And you're talking about St. Luke's specifically. I'm not sure that, well, I know that this process was not in place when that project came forward because it was back in 2016. And the SOP is just less than a year old.
Oh, okay. So then, okay. And
yeah, so there was a lot of confusion about the whole process, and that's...
Okay.
That was,
and when you said the documents, you had a lot of QC comments, would you say that's because the documents were not complete, or were they, that happens a lot now because, drawings don't, there's no such thing as 100% documents anymore.
yeah. So again, that goes across the board. That's just not for restoration. It's definitely not just for Underwood projects.
Okay.
It's across the board that there's just mistakes, there's omissions, there's things that just don't make sense, that contradict each other on the plans. So it's a whole range of different things.
Yeah. So I think that on a job like this, the most important thing is that responsibility, and as Jackie said, whenever you have a meeting, somebody is responsible for the meeting minutes and all that. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you again for your time and attention to this.
Sorry, I have to leave, so I will not be here when you get to the Department of the Environment bill. Okay. But Mr. Gerald and Dr. Nash are prepared to, if you should be interested, as the discussion was this morning, on what the administrative parts of that are that would go with those functions over to the Department of the Environment if it's created. And Director Gerald had sent me 2 emails, one saying that she thought one administrative person would be sufficient, but then in a follow-up email, it says, but we can continue to do without as we are right now. But I think you need to hear what the administrative functions are that they would either need a person for or be absorbing. So if you should care to do that, Dr. Gerald and Mr. Gerald and Dr. Nash are prepared to address that.
Okay, thank you. I would like to, I guess, use my chair privilege here to bump up Ms. Forsman with Annapolis Green. You can come on up, Lynn. If that's okay with the committee.
Yep.
Forsman with Annapolis Green, one of the co-founders. Elvia sends her regards. We are absolutely delighted to be partnering with the city on a very exciting campaign called Plastic Free Annapolis. Through some grant funding from NOAA and Department of the Environment, DNR, we have framed up a program that is, we became familiar with it about a year ago. It was something similar being done in Solomon's Island as well as Ocean City, New Jersey, Ocean City, Maryland, where 2 other campaigns were taking place that were very similar. They took notice of things we were doing with And it's called It Starts with a Straw and Don't Suck, Sip Responsibly, that we had started about a year ago, and thought it would be something really terrific for the capital city of Annapolis to undertake. So thanks to working with Jackie, getting the funding underway, this campaign was rolled out not even a month ago. It is something that the other areas that were funded had 5 months to frame up and deploy. We are actually doing this campaign in 1 month. So we are actually with a week to go. We've been incredibly busy putting a fabulous team together to come up with the campaign itself. It's framed around being a public education campaign. So really what we're doing is outreach to businesses and residents trying to reduce the plastic footprint, trying to bring attention to what plastic is doing to our environment, how it's getting into our waterways. We decided to start, much like these other campaigns in the other cities, with the hospitality community only because they were so much the forefront with a lot of these activities with residents and visitors. So we came up with an idea of putting together an actual toolkit, which is some really invaluable resources, and thanks for taking a look at them up there. We put them together in a compostable clamshell, or in essence what restaurants take out container. And so what we did is put some examples in here, but then did a lot of messaging also. We wanted to make it creative, engaging. We wanted to hand deliver these. So we came up with the catchy graphics. We came up with coasters. We have a tent card. I'll leave all these on display as well. We had some examples of what a compostable cup looks like, cutlery, that these are plant-based materials that can be composted. Not plastic, does not go into recycling, it goes into the trash or a compost facility. To also support everybody, we had additional resources, which is what we feel very invaluable. All of this is going to be built up and supported on our website that is also going to be highlighting Plastic-Free Annapolis. And although this campaign is set to come to a quick close, short and punchy, we, Annapolis Green, will continue to put this forward. We will look for additional funding in order to accomplish that. So to date, we hired a project manager to assist us, and we've probably, the total is right around 70 businesses that we have personally reached out to right now. We have, our goal was 30 restaurants to bring on board. We have restaurants for, at this point, hospitality related, hotels, restaurants, coffee shops, caterers. We have to date 39. I believe there's 29 on the website now. We have to update that. When we deliver these clamshell toolkits, we've delivered 20 as of this past week, because we just had everything produced, and we hand deliver these. And at the same time, we're taking photos, we're doing videos. We have 5 30-second videos being produced, and a 5-minute one, which will be more educational related. That too will be put towards our website. And clings, of course, for people who would like to display that they're a part of this plastic-free campaign, and a pledge for them to sign to make it a little bit more formal. We also are talking with businesses and environmental organizations, as well as residents. And the last bit of this campaign will be a pledge for residents that's going to come out as well. And we will make that available online so we can continue to collect all of this. We've interviewed 3 people who have really been pioneers in this area, one being Alice Estrada over at Annapolis Maritime Museum as an attraction. The other, Anthony Clark of Galway Bay, who started this, goodness, years ago when he was the very first restaurant for the Maryland Green Registry, as well as Jeff Clark over at the Westin, And they too are featured in here talking, what they've been able to accomplish. And on the flip side is a card just talking about more inspirational and things that people can do. So again, this toolkit is chock full of information, it's chock full of resources, hopefully some inspiration. And we're really going to be trying to encourage the peer-to-peer. A lot of the restaurants want to talk to other restaurants. They want to learn what they're doing. Hotels want to see what their partners are doing as well. We have B&Bs as well. Jackie, do you add something?
Yes, I was going to add, this is all being accomplished with a $10,000 grant.
Oh, yes.
Annapolis Green has been very, very resourceful and very efficient with the funds. And I would like Lynn to speak to, there was a question when we were supposed to get this grant money and start this in May. We can't help when we get grant money sometimes from federal agencies and state agencies, so we didn't receive the money until July, and then we had to really start ramping this up quickly. One of the concerns raised by some people was that we've just implemented the styrofoam ban was about to go into effect in September 1st, and would this be perceived by the restaurants as a burden or an additional burden? So I'd like Lynn to speak to what the reaction has been.
We made sure we were very gentle with that, and we were very clear that this was a public education campaign, not anything that was the big stick coming down. And actually, when we really started getting out to most of these people, it was the exact week that it went into effect. And it honestly did not come up, not at all. They were absolutely delighted that we were out here promoting all the things they've been doing and now almost have to do, and to let them speak to exactly what were unique to their to their establishment. So it really did not. And they were just very excited. And what we found above and beyond all, it is delightful out here talking to people and what they're doing. And we're going to collectively share a lot of the best practices, the terrific ideas, the uniqueness on our website. The one thing that would be fabulous, because when really we were ready to launch this, it was Labor Day weekend. And it was a tough time because a lot of people were gone. Annapolis Green, we're a little social media communication machine, and we're doing the best we can, but we really need the support of the city right now. If you were to look at Ocean City's Protect Our Sand and Sea or Solomon's Island is Plastic Watch, they've got the city behind them 100%, doing the press releases, making a big deal about it. We could use your support at this point. We're kind of carrying the load, which we love to do, but having the strength of the city behind us would be fabulous.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Lynn, for all your work. I mean, this is just an incredible quality of product that you're giving out, and the energy you bring and the effectiveness that you and Elvia and Annapolis Green team is really just excellent. I think this kind of partnership really works well for the city, who has limited resources. But when I went to Hawaii for vacation in August, and all over there was paper straws all over. All the plastic cups you saw were the compostable like this, utensils too. So it's definitely the time to do it locally. And so I would definitely like to invite you back whenever you think is the best time, really. Yeah. To give us an update,
sure.
Because I know I'd like to hear the results to figure out if we need to consider legislation in the future or supporting this more. Just talk about our options later on once we get some of the data back.
And we're coming back with some great feedback from the restaurants, from the hotels, from really that we'd like to share with you all, because they're opening up to us and we're learning a whole lot.
Good. And you can auction off this one as the Alderman Arnett decorated one.
I love it.
Mine was decorated, but it didn't come with the cold-cut oven. So.
What can I say?
But when you said you wanted support from the city, could you be a little more elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, we're hoping to get Mayor Buckley's attention. We would like him to be one of the first official pledge signers as the city of Annapolis. Oh, here we go. Ellie did. We're bringing your We're going to be bringing your toolkit over. No, we would love to have some sort of press event to set that off. Would be fabulous. Would like to have some mention on the website. Would be good. That we can link to. And if you look to the website now and what's up with Plastic Free Annapolis off of our site, that is still being built up. So it's going to only get better with a lot more information as we acquire more information. And then I'd love you all to sign a pledge. That'll be coming to you soon.
Right, definitely, yeah. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
We need how to spell your last name. Is it Foreman?
No E.
Ooh, no E.
It's okay, but Lynn has an E. Wandering E.
Well, thank you again, and
Thank you for letting me move up on the agenda. I appreciate that.
you're welcome. So next up, please correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Green, but I think it's the presentation from OEM.
There's no cold cuts up here
Thank you.
Far from it. Good afternoon, Environmental Matters Committee. Director Kevin J. Simmons, Officer of Emergency Management. This is our first time addressing the Environmental Matters Committee, and we appreciate the opportunity. Today, we want to introduce our public outreach project, which is an informational flood awareness brochure for insurable properties in the Annapolis at-risk flood areas. Of these properties, there are about 126, and they're identified in our 2018 hazard mitigation plan. So not only will this project assist the owners with information on how to protect their property, but also will improve our community rating system score, which may lead to reduced flood insurance premiums for the Annapolis community, which is a pretty big deal. So I have OEM Deputy Director Dave Mandel. He's also our mitigation specialist. He's going to talk a little bit more about this outreach initiative. Dave?
Thank you, Chief. Forgive my cold. I'll muster through as best I can here. So, Dave Mandel, Deputy Director, Emergency Management. So Chief Simmons mentioned the basics. Now, it's an outreach pamphlet that we'll be distributing to the special flood hazard area. The property is located there, and it does double duty in that it's obviously great information for the folks to know, but it gives us points towards our community rating system application, which will increase our rating should that be approved. So it's a great thing to do on its own. It's even better thing to do for all of Annapolis, which will eventually, hopefully, once approved, lower premium rates for flood insurance. So you should have copies in front of you of the pamphlet here. The idea is, there's only so much information you can give, to each homeowner without that they'll realistically take a look at. So this is designed to whet their appetite, so to speak, to convey the message that maybe they've flooded, maybe they have not flooded in the past, but they're all in lower lying areas of Annapolis. They tend to concentrate in Eastport and downtown, as you would expect. And taking a look at the pamphlet, it covers the basics on flood insurance. A lot of people don't know, for example, that there's a 30-day waiting period for flood insurance. That comes about, as you can imagine, because people used to call up when the storm was in the Atlantic saying, I'm ready for my flood insurance now. So, of course, now there's a 30-day waiting period. They don't want people to try to game the system by doing that. So there are a lot of things that people have to know about flood insurance, for example, what's covered and what's not. There's a preparation list of things that you need to know how to do and have in place, if you're in a flood-prone property. Some basic mitigation measures. Know where your fuse box is. You got to shut the power off. If that water's coming up to to that fuse box, you don't want a risk of a fire. So there are a lot of basic things that all of us should know about, but it's even more critical for those in flood-prone areas to know about. And obviously, there's contact information for emergency management on there, so they know these are the basics. These are a few areas in which you should take a look at. But when you want some more in-depth information, you can call us, and we'll obviously give you a lot more information that about all these areas and related to mitigation and flood management.
So we're also interested in the committee taking a look at it as well. And if you have any suggestions before we actually delve into this project and actually reach out to the 126 properties, if you have any suggestions where we can add on or improve, we would also be open to hearing those as well. You can contact us with your
Excellent.
Thank you.
suggestions.
Alderman.
Just a couple quick things. One, I was looking at the flood protection measures. I hadn't thought about the fuse box, but I actually did have to put a plug in the floor drain in the basement because Public Works was blowing out a sewer and it blew into my basement, so we had to put that plug in. So there's a lot of things, and I would suggest Eastport Civic Association. Unfortunately, they're meeting tomorrow night, so it's probably too soon, but this would be the perfect thing to come and present to Eastport people, and we'd love to invite you to do that, because this is, all of those checkpoints are relevant to me and my house in Eastport.
And we'd love to come there, and it's about time for us to come back to Eastport
Yeah.
Civic Association. It's been a while.
Right, thank you.
Alderman.
I was curious on if it would be helpful or not to have a link for the resident to see what flood district they're in, or you know how there's floodplain
Mapping.
mapping. Is that?
100-year floodplain.
I mean, I get that question sometimes. Where am I? But I don't know if that would just complicate things.
You know what we may do, Alderwoman, is we'd like this to stand alone, and that anyone could benefit from this
Right.
as flooding information. What may be worth considering is a note with it when we would distribute these flyers to the individuals in those flood-prone areas. Say, you have been selected specifically because your home or property is in this area. That way, folks, anyone could benefit from this, but they get a kind of a special nod saying, you really need to take an extra look at this. And that gives them the information while keeping this applicable to everybody in Annapolis.
Are you actually going to door to door, or?
You know, we have to figure out the logistics plan, but there are 126 properties all in clustered areas.
Yeah.
So we've sort of haven't decided whether we're going to snail mail it out or just take a couple cars and spend an afternoon. But it may be worth doing that. We'll have to see.
So could you explain briefly the points that you get from this outreach will eventually help with insurance premiums, or what's the connection there?
That's right.
Okay.
So is Jackie here? Jackie? You want to come up and talk a little bit about the community rating system, which you're working on?
And how outreach gets us
And
points.
how outreach can, if we get a better rating in the community rating system, we could possibly
Sure.
lower flood insurance.
Right, we had our CAV, which is the Community Assistance Visit, in July, and John Manassa and Racine Hodo are both floodplain administrators, and they helped put that together. That was while Racine was out, so John Manassa did a great job of leading that effort when we had MDE come in and FEMA inspectors to go through all our documents, et cetera, and go on site visits. And during that time, they identified, made suggestions about things that we could be doing within the city to increase our rating, and a report will be generated with all of those recommendations, and that we could then go about implementing, and then our rating would increase. And that would provide a discount for flood insurance to city residents, businesses, et cetera. So we're expecting that fairly soon, and I think overall they were impressed with how well we were documented. It was a big effort by John and Racine to pull those documents together, but now that we know what we need, that will just be a regular process. And there were some suggestions made about how we should be tracking our data a little bit differently. And I think that is easily rectified as well, since we already had a lot of what we needed. So good news that we had a lot of the information, maybe not in the form that they wanted yet.
I've got just one thing to add to that. So the idea behind CRS is that it's a part of the National Flood Insurance Program. It's a subset. And they're trying to incentivize local jurisdictions to obviously take preparations in some cases to mitigate repetitive loss properties and flood-prone properties. Part of that is just even providing information goes towards that goal. You know, so there's and believe it or not, GIS mapping is part of it as well. So Sean Wampler and her team, they have a component in this, and Public Works and Dave Gerald with all the stormwater issues, they've got a component in this. And part of it is just outreach counts a lot, because they recognize that the more folks are aware and invested, the more Annapolis is doing to prepare residents and mitigate properties that are flood prone or actually flooding. So everything related plays into it, and these are part of the points that we can get. And once we get a rating, depending on the rating we receive, it's like an ISO rating for fire. I know we went through that recently. The higher the rating, the greater the discount for flood insurance premiums. And there's iterations of 5%. So if you get a class 10 rating, actually class 9 rating, you get a 5% discount. Class 8 rating would be a 10% discount. So we have to sort of see where we land, assuming everything's accepted. But the more we're doing now to prepare will lead to a better outcome later.
And right now, I think what we determined when we first put together information before the CAV visit was that we were at least a 9, which is, we just mentioned was a 5% reduction, but we think we can do a bit better than that once there's some easy steps to take and then some harder things to do. So the goal would be to try to get somewhere around a couple steps higher at least, as the percentages just keep increasing from there. So one other thing I should mention, that when you're talking about mapping, it was 2 days ago, maybe 1 day ago, I was at the Chesapeake Conservancy for a meeting where they are doing some pretty intensive overlays and mapping, and they're thinking about pursuing a project for even greater mapping tool that has all kinds of overlays that would feed into our ability to look at floodplain and how it would change over the years. The meeting was brought on behalf of the Chesapeake Conservancy to understand what nonprofits in the city and county, what our interest and what our uses would be. And Sean Wampler was there and I was there. But it gets into, you can see every restoration project they put on, all the sewer outfalls, our gray infrastructure, our green infrastructure, anything else that could feed into both stormwater issues, water quality issues, forest conservation issues, everything that feeds into the environment, but it's also very useful for anything floodplain related.
That sounds very useful. Well, thank you. Thank you all for putting this program together. We will take a look at this and get you back some feedback.
Is this live now, the alert, AnnapolisCivicReady.com? Is that?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely it is. It used to be known as Code Red, but we changed the vendor. Now it's Alert Annapolis.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again. Next up,
Thanks for having us.
Yep. Next up on the agenda, we have. Let me look here. Update from Planning and Zoning on development projects.
Good afternoon, Sally Nash, Planning and Zoning. I'll just go through the August spreadsheet. We've had some projects just continue to chug along in the process, like 107 Forbes Street. It's currently under construction. Annapolis Towns at Neal Farm, they're actually wrapping things up. We finalized out a number of their building permits. Enclave at Spa as well, we finalized some and issued some of their building permits, so they're continuing their construction. The one new application for a new project we received is for Newtown 20. As you know, they're going to be redeveloping their project. We've received a forest stand delineation for that project. And
which project?
Newtown 20.
Newtown, okay.
The SPCA is working on its grading permit, but is also moving along in the process. And those are our general updates for the month of August. Are there any questions?
He said. Well, I did have a question, not related to storm. That's good. Yeah, I do want to get into that. One question I have about South Annapolis is this says no, it's not environmental, but no MPDU required, but the sign says like 11 units down there.
Right. There was, Ms. Butler asked about that. There seems to be some kind of discrepancy between the number of units and the number of structures. But you are correct as far as MPDU goes. I'll have to double check that because my understanding was I had here 9 structures, and then Mr. Smith told me it's 11 units. So I was going to change that for September, but then MPDU would go into effect. So I need to double check that, and I'll let you know if it's 9 or 11. We need to figure that out.
It might actually be 12. Don't they have a duplex and a quadruplex?
I think that would be included in the 11. Oh, maybe MPDU isn't required because they're not net new. I think that's right. That's what. Okay, then that's what it is. I did have the wrong number in this spreadsheet. It should be 11, but it's no net new units, and that is why there is no MPDU requirement.
No net new based on
from the existing homes.
That sounds like an odd. That sounds like a little loophole too. I mean, it seems like it should be required regardless of how many there were, or however many new ones you're building there.
If you're just rehabbing your existing units, we wouldn't require someone to come into compliance with all of our development.
Are they rehabbing units?
No, but I'm saying it's 1 unit to 1 unit. So,
but they're completely new from the ground up. They tore them down entirely. It's not like it's redevelopment. I mean, it's redevelopment, but it's not like it's renovation at all.
Well, but they're on the same footprint, right? There's no new footprints.
They have been relocated to State Street, where they were scattered all around the lot. But the number of units itself was grandfathered, which is part of our grandfathering language.
For MPDUs?
It's for redevelopment. We wouldn't consider. It's just like traffic impacts. If the amount of trips a new development is generating is equal to or less than the number of trips generated by the existing use, we wouldn't make them do a traffic study.
Yeah, but we make them comply with all the latest code for stormwater management and environmental regulations.
Depending on what exactly they were doing. I mean, depending on if they're just maintaining things like that, they wouldn't have to do come into current code compliance.
No, if they did what they did here in terms of tearing it down to nothing, they would. But okay, did you have a question about stormwater?
Well, I thought there was some emails that I saw from you about not having proper stormwater management on some project. I thought it was South Annapolis Yachting Center.
I want to have a discussion with Director Gerald another time about some of the sediment control issues. Maybe when he gets back, we can. I think, as far as I understand, I think they've sent the inspector to try to respond to some of the concerns I raised. But Alderwoman Terry, did I see your hand up?
Yes. It's not on the list. I'm just curious because it's an existing gas station at the intersection of Monticello and West Street. Is there any rumblings on what's going to go there, or?
We don't have any applications for that
Nothing.
site.
Okay. All right. The other question, this is sort of off subject, but with the talk of the land swap and all that, is there any way that you could tell me how many residential units are forecasted for the Upper West Street area?
I'm sorry?
Residential units that are currently under construction or scheduled for construction on West Street. Is that, and how many MPDUs? I can email you later.
Just along West Street?
Mm-hmm.
I think I owe you an email on that topic, actually. But okay, yes, I can provide that information.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we need to move on. Thank you very much, Dr. Nash. You're welcome. The next up on the agenda is, sorry, trying to find it.
Legislation.
No. Report from Office of Environmental Policy.
We talked about earlier, was part of my report, to follow up with the various nonprofits and regulatory agencies in the county about what they're doing with regard to stormwater. One comment that was made to me over and over was that they really feel like the relationship has gotten a lot better. They just had an opportunity to testify, and they wanted to just voice some of the frustrations they'd experienced in the past, but they already are seeing there's a lot more receptiveness from city staff about working with them, working through their problems. And I had pre-existing relationships before I came to the city with all of the people that came and testified, so they felt very comfortable, in private conversations, telling me exactly how they felt. And again, it was all positive feedback, the way they see things going, and they're very appreciative of our efforts and having them here to testify. So thank you for that. The styrofoam ban went into effect September 1st, no ripples. All good so far. There have been no inspections yet, so we'll see if anyone's in violation. I'd heard a couple of things.
Is.
Sorry?
The Giant Shopping Center is.
Giant Shopping Center? Okay.
I live right near it, so
I've had some anecdotal reports of some styrofoam still being used. I stopped in a couple of restaurants and they said, no, we're not using anything. I said, we'll make sure when the health inspectors come around, you will be inspected for styrofoam. So from the ones I heard about, I also heard there were a couple of restaurants who were providing styrofoam when they came into the city to do catering or do an event in the city. So that's an area we'll have to watch for, because within city limits they can't use styrofoam at all, even if their business is located outside of the city. So we may need to put a reminder up on our website about that point. So far so good. The only questions, I had a few questions from retailers before September 1st. It was just questions about what we can carry on our shelves and what products we can use. And I had one call from a manufacturer of alternative cardboard boxes, or I don't know if it was cardboard or some other materials they use, but an alternative supplier who wanted to be put on the website. He wanted to know, because RPIO included on our website some suppliers, but was not intended to be a comprehensive list, but he wanted to be added. So it was a positive thing that came from it. So other things that we have going on right now, we're continuing to work with Greenvest on our remediation projects. I believe David Gerald mentioned that there's a grant for a group which will be working with Underwood and Associates. Again, it's Severn Riverkeeper, who is working on the St. Luke's project, to do the project on the SPCA property. So that came off of the city's list of projects to address. So we'll be doing everything that we had in the Greenvest feasibility study except for SPCA, but we will have assurances from Severn Riverkeeper and Underwood Associates that they will be working hand in hand with us to make sure what they do downstream works with what we have planned upstream, and I conditioned the mayor's letter of support on that. So, and DNR, I've also had conversations with DNR that we have agreed to take that off our list of projects and support Severn Riverkeeper doing the project, as long as they're doing it in a way that makes sense with what we have planned along Back Creek Watershed. So we're still planning to move ahead with Back Creek and then address issues at Spot Creek Watershed. I just returned, meaning just in the last hour and a half, from a conference on endocrine disrupting pesticides and the health of the bay, people, and pollinators that was put on by the Maryland Pesticide Network and Education Network. Very, very interesting information. And it's not just about the critters and the pollinators and the butterflies, it's really about our health and how these endocrine disruptors get into our food supply and into our water drinking supply, and we have general exposure to them in our environment. And there will be efforts in the General Assembly again to introduce legislation to address some of these endocrine disrupting pesticides, which are insecticides as well as herbicides. And there is a movement to also ban Roundup and glyphosate and neonicotinoids. I said that correctly. So that is something that the mayor may also consider, I've raised it to him, whether or not the city would look into an education campaign or whether the mayor is interested in legislation regarding pesticides. But I have a whole host of information, and some of it's kind of alarming, and there's more and more studies behind the fact that these are causing autism, ADHD, different kinds of cancer, and hormonal changes, especially children hitting puberty much younger, and other health effects. And it's associated with anger and depression and anxiety in adults as well as children. Let's see what else we have. Just coming off August, so it's been a little slower. We were very involved with the single-use plastics campaign, which is showing really good results. And that's basically what we have right now. Any questions?
Not for me.
Isn't
Anybody
there
else have any?
the tort lawyers are doing this big sweep for people who have used Roundup? I think there's some big
Class action campaign and lawsuit.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And I notice I have Roundup in my garage, so I'm wondering. But it does seem like if these things, in addition to causing cancer, are having all these other deleterious effects. Just like we banned phosphorus, although I don't know how much that's actually enforced.
Right. And there's, there's some of the studies that the scientists were presenting today or come out, some of them in the last week, and the information is just getting updated all the time, and there's more and more solid evidence that these chemicals are really a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely on my radar. And
Better living through chemistry.
That's right.
Right. And it's not just, what goes, when you put them out there, it's not just what's going into the ground, it's what's going up into the air. And so we have air deposition not only into the land, but then it travels to the water as well. So that's the same problem we have with chicken manure and other things, is nitrogen deposition through air deposition. When it hits the air, it does different things, and it reacts with the oxygen in the air, and then we have different things that land in the air, on the land and the water. And same thing with these chemicals. Once they get airborne, it's not just land application, it's water application.
Well, I'll definitely put the pesticide, herbicide issue on our parking lot, as we say, to have maybe a more detailed discussion in the future. In anticipation of legislation at some point, see what I know other jurisdictions have taken some
The
steps.
other issue that I looked into somewhat, but I haven't spent a lot of time on, is DNR brought to our attention the problems with balloon debris on beaches. They did a study this spring and this summer collecting data on balloon debris, and is actually the most found type of pollution on beaches. And it's a problem mostly with, despite the fact that it breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces of plastic and gets into our water, that you can be ingesting through eating fish that ingest it, because it looks like bait, it looks like fish. A lot of the times very attractive to marine mammals, but also you can ingest it while recreating in the water when it breaks down further and further. But it's a real problem for marine mammals. They swallow it in larger pieces and choke on the plastic, or the string that's attached to the balloon is also part of the problem. So DNR is providing a lot of information right now on the problem just in Maryland, but there's other data out there about problems with marine pollution affecting marine life. Yeah. Like plastic bags and balloon pollution.
Well, thank you, Director Garland.
You're welcome.
Real quick, I just wanted to mention, it came up during the last AEC meeting, specifically weed killing in Ward 1, where the weeds come up between the bricks. So we got a response from Roberta Lehner on a recipe that had Dawn in it or something.
It had yes, Dawn detergent, liquid detergent, and Epsom salts, and can't recall there was a third ingredient. It might have been mixed somewhat with water, but I'm glad you brought that up, because I did check with the city for it. The question that was raised, that was Roberta Lehner said that's the mixture you can use and not harm the bricks. And the question was, would that harm the trees because it has salt in it? It was Epsom salts. And the city forester said it was fine for trees as well in those parts that were mentioned, which I don't recall exactly how many parts of each element.
So does the citrus oil harm the bricks? Because there's a citrus oil-based herbicide you can get at True Value.
I don't know. You can check with Roberta on that.
And then there's also a torch. It's a little a little torch at the bottom. It's you can use to burn the weeds off, but that may, I don't know if that would damage the brick either. So just one quick question, actually. I'll go back to the foam ban. I know the county is handling most of the inspections, probably 90% of them. But otherwise, are one of your staff persons going to be handling special inspections?
No, we're not planning to do any special inspections. The county health department is handling all the inspections as part of their regular inspections of restaurants. This will be an item on their checklist.
And grocery stores, I guess.
Sorry?
And grocery stores, too?
And grocery stores. And schools as well.
Right.
The schools fall under it. Any kind of cafeteria type setting, anyone who uses styrofoam for sale of food or to provide food in that type of institutional setting. So if the health inspector finds styrofoam being used, they alert the Office of Environmental Policy. And then we do our own site visit and issue a citation.
Okay.
What is in Dawn? When my boat sank, no, seriously, Dawn must have something different than other detergents, because when my boat sank and gasoline came out, somebody came out with Dawn and started squirting it, and somebody else said it's illegal to use Dawn to disperse gasoline. So there must be something different in Dawn than in other detergents.
I don't know. I'll look into it. It's actually a good question. I mean, you always see those commercials where they use Dawn to clean the grease off the birds that are in wheel slicks.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Director. I'd like to invite Mr. Giblin from Environmental Commission, if you have any remarks you'd like for the committee, including anything on our agenda or just in general.
Good afternoon. Michael Giblin with the Annapolis Environmental Commission. I live at 5 Park Place. I don't have anything specific to report to you this afternoon, but I do just have a couple of things we'd like to get some information on. We'd like to get the FSD report for Newtown so that we could review it at our next meeting. And we'd also like, we haven't had a chance to review the critical area law changes, and so we'd be interested in looking at that as well.
Okay.
So we haven't.
Online.
Well, at our last city council meeting, we did refer it officially to the Environmental Commission. So
it was referred to us?
Yes. So you can find that online. Where you can, if you need help, I think one of us can certainly guide you through it. You can always get in touch with me. You can find all the associated documents, the legislation, the staff report.
Okay.
As well.
I guess I was somewhat confused with the reference here was the overlay fee on the agenda today. So
Ms. Green said that she has sent to the chair of the commission.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't have anything else. Do you have any questions for me?
No, we received your the commission's testimony in regards to the ordinance for the creating a Department of the Environment. So thank you for putting together those comments.
Yeah, we worked quite a bit on that. All right.
Well, thank you, Mr. Goodwin.
Unless you can tell us what's in Dawn.
I don't think you can use it to disperse gasoline. That's what.
Yeah.
I think that was the problem there. Okay.
All right. Thank you. And next up on the agenda, I think, is the legislation. So we have CA 619, which is the charter amendment to establish the Department of the Environment in our charter. And this lays out the creates the department. It adjusts some of the other language, and I think it also includes a whole section about responsibilities of the department and I think the director qualifications. So are there any specific questions specific to the charter amendment? We could just talk about them both at once, I suppose. This and the ordinance, they're obviously go hand in hand. So I guess I can back up and make a few remarks. I know I try not to repeat myself too much from this morning, but as the sponsor, one of the chief sponsors, I suppose, along with Alderman Arnett, the goal is to do everything that we can for the environment and to give the environment, our waterways, our climate, and our future the attention and emphasis it needs. You know, the UN just released a report that said we have 11 years left to prevent the irreversible damage from climate change. You know, we have a incredible frequency of flooding downtown, face a $10 million obligation to clean up our waterways. A lot of things to tackle, and I'm not here to criticize the efforts our current departments are taking, but to simply advocate for what I believe is a approach that allows for greater opportunity and innovation and focus. And yes, I'm speaking in large part from personal experience, as having worked for DNEP for about 7 years, seen how it operated as a Department of the Environment, and my goal is to try to break down some of the silos. You know, I've seen how some of our standards have changed even from the DNEP days. You know, as I think the colleagues are aware, I've had concerns about construction sites which may, you know, they may be in compliance with the bare minimum in the code, but they are not where I would have them as when I was running the inspecting for the sediment control program. And I think that's just one example of where I think we can be doing more. The code sets a floor, but allows us to do a lot more. And that's why, speaking to Director Gerald's comments, I actually think it's good to have advocates and the actual technical staff people in the same department. I think that's a balance you need to have, because the technical experts often, again, just want to hold to the minimum, but environmental regulations have a lot of latitude, and you need the advocates to push. And I'm saying that as somebody who's actually environmental scientist advocate working in a more engineering-oriented department, and we've actually found a very good team there to be able to bring in some of the combine those approaches. And so that's, I think, a benefit worth pursuing. I think we were all in contact with our constituents about wanting more and more and more. Right. Surprise there, right? But I tend to agree with them, especially on the environmental issues, wanting to have more. And as I mentioned this morning, I did speak to Adam Ortiz, who's a former mayor of, I forget the name, small town, but anyway, he's the current director for Montgomery County Department of the Environment. And he had a good point, saying that for a successful environmental organization, in his experience, you need three things: staff and resources, you need regulatory authority, and you need a team with a dedicated and focused mindset. So again, that's what I'm trying to push for. As you'll see with the ordinance, I do have, actually I haven't, they're not uploaded yet, but I do have some proposed amendments, because I want to be clear to staff that I'm not trying to cut out any of the departments. I think I'm trying to encourage a collaborative approach, because one of the things I've seen that have changed is when, for example, developer submits any of the documents for a Forest Conservation Act, they go to the city for review, but currently only planning and zoning gets a review comment in that. And in the past, it used to be more than just planning and zoning. It would be environmental department, or even public works if appropriate. And that's kind of what I'm trying to seek with my amendments. That collaboration is already in the stormwater code. It talks about the department shall perform a comprehensive review and coordinated comments that reflect all input from all appropriate agencies, including, and it lists the agencies, including the departments. And so I think I like that concept. That's what I want to try to insert into forest conservation and sediment control. So we can talk more about that when we get to the amendments, but I'm just trying to give you an overview of. So last thing I'll say is just some of the other benefits I see as it bringing prominence to environmental programs. It brings in inspection and enforcement capability for environmental programs, which would be helping with forest inspections, which my understanding is we no longer inspect construction sites as frequently, and I do want to get clarification from staff on that. I think it integrates the stormwater and the forest programs, builds a team focused on these initiatives. It centralizes our core functions, one-stop shop for environmental permitting. So there are a lot of benefits, and including the reason why this legislation is so long is because it actually compiles a lot of the environmental code into one title. Because currently, for example, the forest code has 3 different codes. There's one in chapter 14, 17, and 21. And this would put it all under 19. So with that, any other discussion, Alderman Arnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just looking at the charter amendment, we were asked a fair question, I thought, this morning at Finance, which is what are we fixing? Why are we doing this? And in thinking about that, I went back and looked at this, and I do see this being the charter amendment, something that I think is a glaring omission for me. But answering why are we doing this, right now, we in fact do this in various different components of the city, and that's fine. But what we don't have happening is this item number 3, the defining the environment, which is this outreach, educational kind of function that I think is critical. And I like the fact that you just mentioned the 11 years. I don't think the American public or the national administration are focusing on how close to the edge we are. And in fact, a couple of weeks ago, there was an article in the Washington Post talking about some areas of this country that have already reached the turning point in terms of their increase in temperatures. So that's relatively small now, and we see the burning of the forests in Brazil and so on. Yeah. If you think about city functions, it's clear that people expect in the immediacy public safety. They want clean water in, dirty water out. But in the long run, as stewards and protectors of our citizens at all levels of government, I think that the environment is what is going to determine the future of this country. We won't need to worry about the number of police officers we have if we can't breathe or we don't have shade, the heat is unbearable, and so forth. The one thing that I have wanted to achieve by establishing this department that I'm not sure, and I'm looking to you as the primary sponsor, comes out, which is that, like you, I don't want to supplant the role of the other departments, but I do want to insert the role of this department as one of the signatories in this process where we're approving projects. And I think that's a major important step. We had a discussion a couple days ago about stormwater management, and it's clear that Public Works is going to, when we get to the grading permit, they're going to have to make sure that that has all of the proper aspects to it to control stormwater management. It's clear that planning and zoning, when they're looking at the site design, is going to have to make sure that it's properly incorporating water management and also forestation. So those departments are always going to be involved in this process, and I wouldn't want to change that. I think about the comments that Tom Smith made at the Planning Commission, all the work that he's invested in the Forest Conservation Act. We don't want to lose that. But we do want to, it seems to me, make sure that there's an entity that is focusing on those things. They're not focusing on the engineering of it or other aspects of it. They're the advocates for the environment, for protecting us so that we don't go over that tipping point And then we really won't care about what legislation we're passing because we'll have much bigger problems. And so I am looking for, when we get into this more, some potential amendment in Section 12 that more clearly defines, at least in my mind, that seat at the table for the whole project approval. Because we can have all the best policies in the world, we can have the mayor flying streamers off of City Hall about cleaning the air or cleaning the water, but if we don't actually have it put in place when we're permitting projects, project by project, we're really not doing anything for the environment. That is where the rubber meets the road. So to me, there is a very definite reason for giving the environment more ascendancy through this change in the code. But I think we need to also be very specific about the practical thing that there needs to be a signature line where the Department of the Environment has said, yes, this has done what we need to do. It harkens back to the whole debate about the parameters for the stormwater management. So we need to have minimums, but it seems to me we need to have people that are advocating for, let's do more than the minimum. And this isn't just an environmental thing. We want them to advocate in the project that we do more than the minimum, because what the developer doesn't do for that project above the minimum, we, the taxpayers, will have to do. Yeah. And that perspective needs to be brought to the table. It doesn't mean that you force it to be to 200% stormwater minimization or mitigation, but it does mean that we have to ask that question. Could we be doing more? What does it cost? What is the cost benefit? I thought Matt Waters, oh my God.
What? Do you want to come sit in the hot seat?
I thought that Matt Waters really brought a lot of information to us when he was showing those curves about how much you could mitigate water after a certain point and you can't. So that's what, for me, this is really about, is that kind of emphasis, that kind of perspective. It is engineering, but it's more than engineering. It's forestry, but it's more than forestry. And so that's what I want to see in here and what we should get out of it.
Yeah,
nobody's listening.
I'm listening. I certainly think that I'm certainly open to adjusting this. I think that's a good point to try to call that out more clearly. It does talk about enforcing the rules and regulations governing a number of areas, enforcing, identifying, and assisting.
But it doesn't talk about approval.
But it doesn't specifically talk about. I think the code does
in the ordinance.
In the ordinance, because, but
I think it needs to be here too.
Maybe be added here too. I would like to invite staff who came to talk about this, because I know I have a number of questions. So, Director Gerald, Dr. Nash,
and what happened to?
I don't know. Do you know what happened to Director Gerald?
I think he thought he was through.
Okay.
Yeah, right. You look way too happy.
That's right. Okay.
Thank you.
So before I start asking questions, Alderwoman, did you have any other statement before we jump into questions, or?
I was just thinking of the timing. Yes, I probably would like to make a statement, and I thought it best that if you would allow me to read a response to Betsy Love that I wrote. I thought that would structure my position the best way, and I could be as brief as possible.
Do you want to do that now or after the discussion with the directors?
I'd like to do that now. I think.
Okay.
Do you mind? Okay.
Sure.
It's funny because last night I went to this ULI presentation, and the woman that was tasked with resiliency, she offered a great analogy. She spoke of the resiliency effort in putting this concept plan together, and she made a great statement that I believe, and she said resiliency should be threaded through all of the departments. And I feel the same way with the environment. It is so important that I think every department should have a person that is a champion, for sustainability and the environment. It's that important. So with that, let me just read what I wrote back to Betsy Love about her request that on voting for the department I thought would be the best thing. Dear Betsy, I appreciate so much the effort, passion, concern, and insight your email offers on this subject on the petting ordinance and to form a department. I am focusing and identifying the problem, which I believe is stormwater oversight. I trust this will improve with the additional stormwater management engineer we put in the budget. My concern on the department is that you are possibly isolating certain roles that need interface with other departments, specifically planning and zoning. These positions, such as reforestation, critical area review, stormwater management requirements, cross over departments, and I fear for a silo effect, which is something we worked really hard to prevent. The oversight you ask for cannot be done in isolation, but should be a checks and balances between different skill sets, such as engineers and environmentalists. We also have to work within our budget framework and focus on coordination between departments, not elevating one over the other. I believe each department has an obligation to focus on environmental impact and process, and that a multidiscipline approach is best. The Director of Environmental Policy would be responsible for that coordination, where I believe the focus should lie in lieu of managing a department. So to not conflate issues, I believe we should approach this using the scientific method. Identify the specific problem, propose a first solution, reevaluate it in a year if we've addressed it. Forming a department risks diluting the problem, not addressing it. I believe within our construct, this added stormwater management engineer is the short-term solution, and possibly long-term. Permitting delay is a separate issue we must address. I clearly believe that the city is in need of a permitting expediter, perhaps take an existing position with that role, as all projects, without this shepherding through, they all suffer. So I share your concerns wholeheartedly, and believe me, I'm focused on the projects first and drilling down to fix the problems that you mentioned. In summary, I am doubtful forming a department within our existing framework will fix the problem. It may elevate the subject and importance, but that's not enough. Thank you for your time and your desire and hope. Thanks. Thanks for letting me read that.
Thank you.
So when we get to committee discussion, I think there's a lot of things that I'd like to discuss in your statement, Alderwoman Tierney. I think there's some things that you assert that I don't think are the case, and I don't believe are going to happen, but that's why we have committees. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have different people on the committees, because if we all thought the same thing, we'd only need one of us.
That's right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we share, I share a lot of your concerns. I do think that our proposal will address some of those. So I'd like to get into that more as well. But first, I do have some questions. I'll wait on David Gerald. I guess I'll have to. So I'd like to start with Director Gerald, since you were the one in the middle of this with the current environmental structure we have, or lack thereof. I've been continually...
I'm sorry, I was being asked a question.
Okay. So I've been continually impressed with the amount of work that has come out of such a small office. And every time you report to the council, and it's very impressive. And you have, again, a very good reputation in the community. So, but I'd like to know from your perspective, like, what challenges, I know you didn't have an opportunity to work under the previous model, but what kind of challenges have you had with the current organizational structure? I know that's a broad question.
It is.
But I know, because the original idea behind setting up this office, and my colleague who was here for that, please correct me, but reviewing the testimony from the council at the time, and from actually Director Gerald, who was the city manager, acting city manager at the time, was that, and he even said, this approach is entirely up to really the city manager. The whole idea was to have it be kind of, and this is coming directly from former Director Broadbent, is that the whole idea was to have her kind of be second in command to the city manager and just be able to, at least that's how it was sold to her, to be able to have direct influence over some of the programs and departments and guide that direction. And, from my understanding is my understanding is that hasn't always been the easiest thing to actually accomplish. And so that's why, at least I started to think more about, because I think Alderwoman is correct in terms of wanting to seek for this organizational-wide change, but I think that's much more difficult to achieve. And I think creating a department that collects as many of these environmental programs as we can, to have a director that has more opportunity over those core functions to enact change would be a more effective model. So
to answer your broad question, I guess it's more of a frustration in actually doing my job, is that knowing that I don't have ultimate decision-making authority over many of the decisions. Now, I was tasked with, when I took this job, and even before that, to make sure that there was cooperation and communication, much better cooperation and communication between Planning, Zoning, and Public Works and OEP and any other department or office as the subject required, whether it's OEM or the Office of Law or Department of Recreation, Parks and Recreation, or Fire and Police. And I think I've done a very good job at that. I have good relationships with all the directors and chiefs of divisions and offices, and I especially interact most often with Planning and Zoning and Public Works. And we've established that kind of rapport and relationship where there's instant communication between us and mutual respect and support for one another's work. However, sometimes I feel that I'm in the position of offering some really good advice without any final say. And where the environmental groups come in, I've heard myself referred to as an advocate several times. A little uncomfortable with that, because I don't always want to advocate for something if it's not a good project, or if an environmental group comes to me and says, they want to do something, and I might have some, heartburn with it, or don't think it's actually a project I would advocate for. It sees more of a, I don't know if it's an ombudsman or a facilitator role to facilitate the successful completion of a good project. But they expect, environmental groups and the regulatory agencies approach me as if I did have the final decision-making authority. That's a little frustrating to work with and to spend a lot of time and effort trying to track something down or advocate or persuade others to take the action I think that is important for the environment. The only other thing I would add to that is that while I have great respect for the other directors of other departments, their first and foremost thought is not the environment. And I think that's the point that all three of you have made at different times, is that that's the thing that is lacking, is the environmental focus. Whereas I come in every single day, and from start to finish, I'm thinking about what's important for the environment. And as I believe Alderman Arnett said, if we don't have water to drink and air to breathe and clean land to live on, then we have nothing. And we are now at an extreme tipping point. And every conference I go to with scientists providing information is more and more alarming, and we need to do something now. It needs to be the ultimate focus in absolutely everything we do, as Alderwoman Tierney has pointed out. It needs to be incorporated, and the environment needs to be at the forefront of absolutely every decision we make.
And and that's where I can definitely see the importance of what Adam Ortiz is talking about in terms of bringing that regulatory authority to give some teeth to, and that's where, again, I feel like it's beneficial to blend the advocates with the people who have the regulatory authority. So okay, I have one more question, then I'll pass it along to
Okay, yeah, I just have a question for Director Gill.
Go ahead.
Jackie, did you work with David Gerald on the SOP? I mean, that he spoke of earlier. He talked about a standard operating procedure,
Right.
And from I think there were six steps. Did you relate to him your concern that you're speaking of now, or that this would be better done with an environmental department, or did you, you went through these steps with the status quo? Because he did say that that your office was needed in the permit application to be an advocate, because his engineers may or may not think that way. So I'm just curious that if you embraced his standard operating procedure, are you saying now that there could be a better way of doing this?
First of all, that was created, that standard operating procedure was created by a DNAP. And it had not really been used yet until the St. Luke's project. So that was, they were almost a guinea pig for that, to see how it actually flowed and worked and where it could be improved upon. So, no, I did not work on it. Maria Broadbent had been the person who put that together with the help of Matt Waters, a stormwater engineer. And then, but I was part of the meeting where David and I sat down with Underwood and Associates and went through it, and we all made suggestions together. So he had his perspective on it, I had mine, and Underwood and Associates had theirs, and we were all working towards the same goal. So I am going to take it and work on it and revise it per the comments that came out of that meeting. And when we put it into practice by having that first meeting with the Back Creek project, there were some more issues raised during that meeting where we thought would feed well into some more revisions to that SOP. So once I make the revisions to it, I'll share it with David and with Sally, and we'll make further revision to it, and Teresa, of course, and we'll come up with a final product that we will start using.
So that must be hard for you, because you don't know if you're acting as an Office of Environmental Policy or a separate department. That's...
Well, right now I'm acting as the Office of Environmental Policy.
And so, okay, so you can't really comment on whether or not this standard operating procedure would work to yeah.
I'm a little confused because David Gerald testified that standard operating procedure was developed in the past year. And that was my understanding from previous meetings I've had.
No, it was developed like just a few months before I came on board, or within that year. I've asked Matt Waters when it was developed, and he said it was sometime during, so I came on board on May of 2018, and it probably was developed sometime in the end of 2017.
All right, well, we'll confirm when it was developed. It was my understanding from previous meetings that it was in the last year, and I thought that you were involved in developing the SOP, so.
No, that was developed,
So it wasn't DNAP?
It was made, no, it was definitely by
DNAP was 2016.
Well, then it was the Office of Environmental Policy, but it was under Maria Broadbent when it was developed, when she was still an employee.
Ignore my question. I thought that I had heard that you were involved with this, and that, so I was asking how would it be different if you were a department, that's all.
Right, no, and I was involved with the most recent revisions we're making to it.
So I have a question. So who handles, and what staff person handles the construction inspection for tree protection measures, like what Mr. Van Zufen used to do for construction sites? Because I know Office of Environmental Policy has the forester, but...
During building permit?
Yeah.
Well, we work closely with Brian. That's basically coordinated between planning and zoning staff and Brian Adams.
So Brian's tasked currently with inspecting construction sites for tree protection?
He does do inspections, and he inspects for bond releases currently.
Okay. So is he included in the permit review process?
He is for trees in the historic district. we confer with him.
But not for general, who looks
For
at tree
trees and
protection
development
measures?
areas, no, that's done by our planners.
So each of your planners.
So-
Unless there's an unusual situation and we need his advice.
So when I first came on board in May of 2018, the initial decision-making with regard to tree inspections, that was in planning and zoning. And Pete Gutwald, who was the director at the time, asked me who happens to be here, if you recall, he asked if Brian could take that responsibility. It's been something that was in DNEP before, and we conferred with Brian, and Brian said he would take on that responsibility again.
Okay.
So, actually, I have a question, and it involves all of you, but in trying to think this through, and it's good that Pete's here, because I think this has an impact on 03517 and 01418, our favorite, about having developers present a concept review before they can apply. And it occurred to me that we've been focusing on, the height of the building or the footprint of the building, those sorts of things in that concept review. But when we get into the thick of it, it turns out as often as not, it's things like the number of trees that are getting cut down or the stormwater that's running off the project that are important aspects of the concept review. And I think they stay that way throughout the whole process. So Alderman Savage and I have been going through all of the steps of the clearance process and trying to figure out who all the players are and how the new department would be integrated into that process. And that's one of the things that I think we need to go back and look very carefully at the charter amendment and the ordinance to make sure that we have that choreography. It is not, again, it is not the attempt to eliminate one group and insert another group. And in fact, both Pete, to me, independently, personally, and Director Gerald have said that this process always is going to be dependent upon all of the staff working together, almost in a matrix management kind of an organization. That it can't be, as Alderwoman Tierney said, a silo here and a silo there. And really what happens if you do that, you get the big collision when it gets to be the public hearings and the final permitting process, and that's when the public finds out what's really happening. And that was the whole reason for that pre-application public hearing, was to get the full scope so that the community knew everything that was going to be going on with the project and not come rushing in. And this is always a frustration for the developers. It's sort of at the last minute the community becomes aware and they come in with all of these concerns, and we want the community to be aware of those things in the beginning and work in the iteratively with the staff and the developer as the whole things go forward, so that we don't have the big clash at the end, which does take up a lot of time and costs a lot of money, and everybody ends up being very unhappy. So I think that these elements and having this understanding of stormwater and trees is every bit as important as the fenestration or the roof pitch in terms of a successful project is, again, why I think having this department and having that vision, as you said, Director Giles, where your focus will be the environment, it won't be the engineering, or it won't be the planning or inspection. It will be very much focused there. Director Gerald said that the stormwater management, it's 3 out of 110 staff, but it's a big chunk of his time. And I think that we really do need to think about how that all works most effectively. That's my question.
Well, I do have a question I want to get into, because so the way the ordinance is written, it's cost neutral. Staff's just being shuffled around. But the city manager did talk this morning about if an administrative assistant is added to the payroll, that would be obviously a cost. So you said earlier, though, that, because in the meeting you said that Director Giles had indicated that it's required, but then you said that she didn't. So, Director Giles, I guess, do you feel like it's an administrative support position is needed if a department is created?
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, I hope, City Manager, that can be reflected in the staff report.
So Alderman Savage, I asked if your bill is passed, what does Director Giles see as the clerical administrative needs of a department that size with those responsibilities? To which she replied, at least one full-time administrative assistant. I need to make sure that I am accounting for all positions that will be included, and that she would get back to me. And then she wrote back, one administrative assistant would be sufficient, but we could continue to get by without one.
Okay.
So I can't imagine a department with no administrative assistant. However, if Director Giles thinks that's the case, as a city manager, I think it's very doubtful. But I'd be happy to put in the fiscal, or have the finance director put in the fiscal note that Ms. Giles doesn't think a position is needed.
Well, the more important question, and I was hoping Director Gerald would be here, is to find out from him how many administrative assistant positions do you have? What percentage of their jobs were?
So I have an email from Director
stormwater?
Gerald as well, because I asked him the question of, what is the staffing, and is there an opportunity if the duties for stormwater are transferred, could a administrative position be transferred? And he said it could not. So let me try and find that.
But what about actually just a position sharing responsibilities with another department, or helping out another department, because they are right next door? I'm assuming based on the workload for the stormwater management program, that a portion of an administrative assistant's responsibilities would be offloaded.
So
and that's what I need to find out, get clarification on from
So I would
Director
seek
Gerald.
clarification on that. Director Giles has asked me for an administrative position before for the Office of Environmental Policy. So I believe she believes there's already a need to at least have some administrative assistance in the offices that exist right now without the additional duties. There are also administrative duties related to forest conservation in planning and zoning that also would shift to this department. But again, it would not free up a position in planning and zoning.
My further answer to that is, no, I don't think we need an administrative assistant. As I replied to the city manager initially, I did say one administrative assistant, but I need to check the legislation to make sure I count for all positions. I will get back to you, which I did, and said, one, we could use an administrative assistant, but we could do without as we are now. And then when I read through the legislation, I saw what positions were being actually transferred. I had to remind myself. I had previously conferred with Matt Waters, the stormwater engineer, whether or not he used an administrative assistant for any of his duties, and he told me he did not. Our inspector also does not use an administrative assistant, the stormwater inspector. I had previously asked the city manager for administrative assistant when asked what we could put in the next year's budget. Of course, if there was money there, we could use one. But is it essential? No. So I stand by that answer, and I am consistent with my statements to the city manager with regard to my emails. Okay. Sure, I think every department could take extra help, but we can still do without it. And currently, we are doing all our own administrative work, and unless there's something from planning and zoning that I have not considered, then no, we don't need an administrative assistant.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to know because I think I'm sure there is a lot of need as well. But if it's the intent of, if this gets voted on, and it's the intent of the council that we try to make do with our existing resources, I think we need to look at some alternative and creative approaches to address that. Alderman.
So I'm having the same problem with this line of discussion that I had this morning at the Finance Committee. On one hand, we're talking about survival, gasping for breath, not finding water to drink, and having preeminence of the environment. And down here, we're talking about administrative staff. If this is in the balance with that, I think we've got something way out of whack. If there is a requirement for administrative support for this department, we will put it in the next budget and deal with it then. I don't think we're talking about a charter amendment that is being balanced by whether or not we need an administrative staff person. If it is that close, I don't think we should do the charter amendment. If it's all in the balance of an administrative staff, I think that's, but that's not the balance for me. I think that this is much more important than that. The Finance Committee will take this up. Alderwoman Finlayson asked for very good information. I don't quite remember it the same way she did, but I would not fault her memory. It could be mine, but we have, over time, eliminated administrative staff, some of it, because word processing and things like that have overtaken the need for it. But I think that knowing what kind of administrative staff, even how we define administrative staff, is a good thing to know in general. Yeah. And then if there is support, so administrative staff could be time cards and submitting to make phone calls, stuff like that, or it could be somebody who's responsible for keeping logs, making sure they're up to date. I was thinking when Sally was giving her report on the projects, and that was something that actually Frank Biba developed, that spreadsheet, so we can keep track of it. It would be nice to have that same kind of spreadsheet for the kinds of things that are going on for stream restoration, all the other environmental things, and that is a more administrative kind of function. We wouldn't want Mr. Waters doing that kind of stuff. That's not, an engineer has other things they can be doing. So it could well develop that there will be those sorts of things that kind of help would be needed, and when it does, we can deal with it. But
right. And what I've done on the few occasions when there was something we needed done, such as a flyer, the letters needing to go out for the styrofoam ban, or copying for information we were putting out for, I think, the styrofoam ban, we did one, and there was something for something else. I requested Director Gerald if I could use one of his administrative assistants for those projects, and he readily agreed. And those people were available.
Yeah, there was always, when I was with DNEP, a lot of support between the departments. But now that I think about it, actually, DNEP, at least the environmental program arm, we didn't have an administrative assistant for that part, although we did have one that worked, Ms. Green knows, with the permitting end of it, but that's already handled by plan and zoning. Anyway, so Alderwoman.
Yeah, I have a comment and clarification and then a question. My comment is, I don't think in this discussion we should lose sight of what are we trying to fix, what's broken, okay? And maybe my idea of what's broken is different than others. I think we all agree about the importance of the environment, and my point of clarification was what I meant by this thread of environmental. For example, I'm not adding a position in each department. Archie Trader, for example, Parks and Recs. He is currently developing a plan to include the health of the Chesapeake Bay into his Parks and Recs programming with the children as the beneficiaries and the volunteers. So that's an example of, a department taking the initiative. So I can't help but think that, this silo effect will come back to us. And the other thing I wanted to, the question was to Dr. Nash. My understanding is critical areas, she has also, how would she be split, if you will?
All critical area would stay in planning and zoning.
with the department.
That's right.
Yeah,
So there would have to be then interface with her on projects. I would think that you would interface with.
And that's what we
critical
do
areas.
now. We do,
Okay. Okay.
especially with stream restoration projects.
Okay.
And those are always involving
Again,
critical
I'm
area.
looking at what's broken then. I'm hearing good stuff about the coordination, so I'm just puzzled by that. What's broken as far as organization and communication and...
well, I mean, do you need something to be broken in order to try to improve it?
Well, I think
And
forming
we've
a department is a big deal.
But I do think that...
It's a big administrative deal. It's not like tomorrow we'll have a department and everything's hunky-dory. Again, I think it will dilute the issue right now, and I think we have to focus on these projects. My priority are these projects and addressing the stormwater management. And I don't think forming an entire department is going to address that any differently than the way we're handling, or not handling it now. There's different skill sets in each department, and they all have to work together, and there has to be this cross-pollination. And the responsibility would be with you to be that thread, if you will, Jackie, to coordinate between these departments. And so that's, versus managing a department, that's almost two different skill sets. To be the person trying to be the, sorry to say, advocate, that's a different skill set than managing a department. That's kind of like careful what you wish for. So that's just really an aside, but I just wanted to clarify that I didn't mean on everybody adding an environmentalist. I mean it should be, everybody has their environmental, priorities.
Well, yeah, and I think, but again, I don't think something has to be broken in order to try to improve it. But I also think that we've seen instances where, yes, as Director Gerald put it, and I've said this before myself, is that's not the focus of these departments, right? Public Works is about 110 staff. 3 of them are in the stormwater environmental part of it. Planning and Zoning has a number of staff, and they don't have anybody dedicated to this. As she said, she would wake up, that's her focus. Every day she'd be thinking about how can I use our regulations to help meet our goals of whatever, restoring the waterway, addressing climate change. And we've seen that happen, right? Public Works is sure they're following the code, but we had to pass a resolution to get them to use the provision to ask for more, to use more. And I think that's where if you had somebody focused on the environment, they would be asking themselves that every day, what can I do, everything I can do under the law to achieve these goals using the maximum extent. And that's where you see, I have seen a difference in quality of these construction sites. I know because I used to, again, run that sediment control program. These sites out there today, I would have shut down so many of them. The ones I went to and sent a report to, yes, they may be in compliance with the bare minimum of the code, but we're not using everything to the maximum extent we can to achieve our goals. And that's where I'm saying the system's not broken necessarily, but it's not working as best as it can. And that's why I'm fighting for a department.
And I see that weakness as field implementation, inspections, and just I'm drilling down to what the real problem is.
But that's a piecemeal solution. If you expect us to drill down in every single policy, every single approach, when a department, that would be their job, is to do that every day. They would be focusing on how to make those improvements.
But I guess the word is confusion, is that when you have a project, we're all working with the same MDE parameters. Whether you're an engineer or an environmentalist, that project comes to us with a scope of work that an owner has paid for, basically. That's how it works. They pay their civil engineer to design drawings, and that drawing goes through subsequent reviews. And if it's more than what that engineer draws, it's my Massachusetts accent. If it's more than what the civil engineer draws, it's added cost, it goes back to the owner. There's a logic into these projects, and I just don't know how you have somebody saying we need to do more gets into that project with with having a department versus just being part of the teamwork, part of the SOP, if you will. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to coordination. And I was actually excited to hear David's, steps where everybody gets in the room, has responsibilities, and circle back, and then have finally a final plan before there's a shovel in the ground. That's where I say I don't see the problem on paper. I do see the problem in the field. I see these stormwater management problems and erosion control, and a lot of that is with not so much what's on the drawings, but site logistics, and should be handled by the contractor, and that they should have a sign that says call this number. These are things that can be fixed without forming a department. That's my frustration.
Alderman Arnett, you can handle it.
So I think, I hope I expressed, and I think the Director Guild expressed, that one of the things that's broken is the authority and the signature line. But I also think we need to look back at the context for the derivation of offering this charter amendment, and that was the alternative, which was to atomize the Office of Environmental Policy and distribute the components, the few components that it has now, to other departments. And so the choice is pretty stark of having a department with authority and staff, or having an advisor in the mayor's office. And that is the cauldron from which this developed. I was perfectly satisfied to have an office of environmental policy, and I think it needed more staff. The whole department versus office has something more to do with things that the Office of Law is pointing out to us. So if the objection is creating a department as opposed to having an office, I don't think in terms of resources we're talking about any significant difference in its titles and its legal things. The authority line and making sure that we're prioritizing and putting forward the environment as a very important concern of the city is what's really important here. The details of the name of the organization, I think in terms of the interaction of the staff, the process already assures us that's going to happen. Whatever we do, as long as we do have some kind of office or department of the environment. And that is what's critical. These other things, I think, are distractions.
Yeah, and just before I turn it over, just to echo that point, and I do think the lack of regulatory authority is really one of the pieces we're missing in that, those three things I've been looking for. And, I can relate even my experience with the state, right? And I've been to the state formed a new Public Information Act officer or ombudsman to deal with public complaints, but it's just has no teeth. You go to them, they go to the departments and say, oh, this person isn't getting what they requested. Can you please try to, you need to get them more. But they have no authority to actually enforce that. And I think what this legislation would do, and if you look at my amendments, it requires that the comments have to be coordinated and they get input from each of the departments. And I think that's going to make for more effective better projects. If you're concerned about projects like development projects or just environmental projects, I think you would see an improvement, especially on the environment where you'd have the one-stop shop for environmental permitting. Because again, it worked well to have the forest conservation, the enforcement, and the stormwater all together in DNEP. And again, think about what we can do to make things better. I don't want to have to sit here and always have to be advocating to the departments about, oh, you should be using this provision of our code. You should be doing more and more and more. I think we need to set up a structure internally that'll drive itself in that regard. Because I frankly have other things I want to work on than hounding staff about and departments about these individual things.
So educate me on what the regulatory authority is. What is that? Because I'm going to put my contractor's hat on. MDE is the authority. If you look at this email that David Gerald wrote, you can see it here. MDE authorization has not been provided for the additional work. MDE has not provided authorization for the increase in the total disturbed area, et cetera, et cetera. So what is this regulatory authority that you're asking for?
So yeah, that's a good question, and so maybe I'll walk through one example. So how I used to work with DNEP for forest conservation, for example, is you would have the applicant would submit their forest stand delineation, which is the first report in that series of reports they have to submit, and that would go, at the time, that would go to DNEP, or in this case, it would still go through with the development process to plan and zoning, and then that plan would get distributed to the environmental department, and that environmental department, and that's one thing I want to make sure I'm clear in here about, that environmental department. It says shall perform a comprehensive review of the forest and delineation. Coordinated comments will be provided that reflect input from all appropriate agencies, including but not limited to the Department of Planning and Zoning. So when that document gets entered into our permit tracking software, it'll have a column for reviews, and each department will be listed there. It'll be Department of the Environment, Planning and Zoning, maybe Public Works, whoever this, it's pretty, the language here is pretty general. If it needs to go to whomever, you put it in there, and those agencies or departments would submit the comments, and under this code, the environmental department would still be the last sign-off. And this is what we did in DNEP, is that even though we were getting comments from Planning and Zoning and Public Works, DNEP had the last sign-off. So they would send the certified letter that says the forest stand delineation is, whatever the term they use, approved or confirmed to be complete and correct, because that's the final sign-off you need. Right. And that's the regulatory authority, because otherwise you have, even if, say we don't create a department and we just give the office a sign-off authority, or at least a review authority, they would still be listed in the permit tracking as being an agency who can comment, but the comments would have no force of law. So the ruling department, who would be under the current code, Planning and Zoning, would, granted, I think they have a good relationship, but you could have a situation where Planning and Zoning disagrees with the environmental office, and the ruling comment, who has authority, regulatory authority, is Planning and Zoning, when I believe the final sign-off authority should be with the environmental department, who is focused on those things. I don't want the necessarily, Planning and Zoning has a lot of other things to be concerned with, but I just think dedicating. Does that help with the process a little bit?
Yeah, and let me give you an analogy in like building construction. The fire marshal is God. Everybody, you go through the checks, check every department, check, and the fire marshal looks at it last, and he's the one that decides what's needed to make this building safe. We have an office. We have an office of the fire marshal. He's not a separate department, but he's the last one to look at it. So again, that fits my argument of why a department.
Sorry, I don't understand. Can you explain that a little more?
I'm just saying the fire marshal in building construction is just as important. It's life safety.
Right.
And it works. It works that he looks at it last, and everybody knows that he's the last one to look at it, and we don't have a department of a fire marshal. I believe it's an office of the fire marshal review, and I think of it as sort of the same steps.
As a part of what review?
The fire marshal looks at drawings for code violations and stuff like that.
So you're talking about during the building permit review?
Yeah.
Well, that's because the fire marshal's office has the regulatory authority over that part of the code, over the fire part of the code. So if they deny if they, in their review for that permit, building permit or whatever, they deny it, then yeah, the permit can't be approved. But under the current code, Office of Environmental Policy has no authority in the code whatsoever to be able to say denied or require revisions, because they can't. The fire marshal can require revisions because that's their code. They have authority in our code, and that's what I'm trying to give to a department, is to have that authority to be able to get their concerns and to be the last line of authority for environmental, just like the fire is the last authority for the fire issues.
I would suggest that positions are fairly firmly entrenched, and we've been at this for almost 3 hours. I wonder if there's much more productive we can do today.
Well, I think it was, well, I know the recommendation was probably a foregone conclusion since...
You need quorum to favorable or?
No, but I mean, I know it was a foregone conclusion because Ross, or Alderman Arnett's the other sponsor, but I wanted to get a chance to dialogue with you.
So,
right.
no, I said my position stays the same. I think we've worked hard to have this, these departments, they need to coordinate with each other, and I'm very fearful of the silo effect. And I have a very strong opinion that we're all working off the same, MDE requirements, and when you look at it and say, well, we need to do this, it ultimately will have to go back to whoever the owner is, and they're going to have to. It's out of scope. It's that from a developer point of view, that's a little bit frustrating too. So we have to just look at where this has been successful. It doesn't preclude that the office. We have an Office of Environmental Policy, and that that's pretty cool. And I just don't think that it's really, really unfortunate if we feel like we need to form a department just for them to have their input. And if that's where we are, there's probably other reasons for it. But I just don't think we should. I think it's going to dilute the problem, and we're still going to have projects that need more site oversight than someone going from one department to the other. And that's probably the engineer in me talking, but.
Well, I mean, but again, the siloing is, I share your concern, but this would help resolve that, in my opinion, because you're putting the stormwater, the sediment control, and the forest under one department. And so, and we would be requiring under the code that they don't silo, that they actually have to coordinate their comments and incorporate the comments from other departments. That is, by definition, trying to go against the siloing, right? Where currently we do the siloing. So that's why I don't understand, if you're concerned about it, you should be getting on board with this idea to kind of tear down those silos.
I think, as I said, everybody has different skill sets, and, stormwater management engineer would probably assume that he's going to be working in the Department of Public Works, and critical areas would assume that they're working in a Department of Planning and Zoning. It's a big deal if you're going to you're basically departmentalizing it.
I'm not moving critical area, one. And Public Works, and stormwater was underneath DNEP for probably over 10 years. It was in DNEP when they created the stormwater program. I mean, so it's been there most of its life. It's only been under Public Works for a short period of time. So if you want to talk about
so you're saying DNAP was a success?
Not completely, but I definitely see different strength as I'm comparing,
pros and cons.
as I'm comparing the different organizational models. I've seen us lose this focus again about we shouldn't have to be pushing our departments to use the law to the maximum extent to achieve our goals, when that's what I've had to do. If we have somebody who's empowered to do that every day, I think we could avoid that and save ourselves a lot of headache, and also prepare for the future and all these concerns that we've highlighted. All right, I'll entertain a motion.
I move we adjourn.
Okay, Fred.
Do you want to take action?
Probably if we continue, we should have David Gerald.
I thought I'm carrying over from finance. I thought we did want to get some more information
But
I
we
guess
don't-
that is
we don't deal
finance.
with
For this
finance,
committee,
so you
no,
can do-
I move that we recommend favorably for the charter amendment for creating the Department of the Environment.
I'll second. All those in favor? Aye.
Is there a second?
Yeah, me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Aye.
All those opposed?
No.
All right. We'll move on to the ordinance, which is, what is it? 1819. We've already discussed it. Is there any motion?
Well, you have some amendments, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Alderman Savage,
Yes.
when this meeting is over, would you please forward your amendments to the staff so we can see them?
Yeah, and I have some copies here. The very last, I gave one. Yeah, here, I can give you some copies for the two of you. So I do need to give these to the law office for proper formatting, but since it already uses established language, I don't think it'll be too much of a problem. So I've already explained the intent of this. Even if you don't support the ordinance, perhaps you'll support the intent of the amendments
Intent of the
to
amendments. Comprehensive review.
remove the siloing. So they're broken up into different sections. The first three amendments would clearly incorporate and include plan and zoning in the review for the forest conservation application. The reason there are three amendments is because the first one deals with the forest stand delineation, the second one deals with the preliminary forest conservation plan, the third one deals with the final forest conservation plan. So this would just make sure that we codify kind of the removal of that siloing and require that collaboration between the departments, which again I know is already happening to a certain degree. The next group, Amendment 4 and 5, do the same thing for the sediment control plans. And then on the back, I just made a note that we don't have to do this for the stormwater because it's already in there. And that's where I got the idea, actually, is once I reread all the stormwater code. So that's any questions on the amendment as you read through it? Or from staff, too, if you have any questions. But.
So are you saying this doesn't happen now? Or you're just defining if it's a department, then they should perform the comprehensive review?
It doesn't happen now. Right now, there's dialogue between the departments, but there's no codified coordination of comments. For example, that would include in other departments for forest conservation and the sediment control.
I guess I would interject something that is a carryover from experience we're having with the short-term vacation rental, which is that it's important to have the amendments go through the Office of Law and be put into proper form. I'm not saying these aren't, but I would be more comfortable if we took some time to make sure that this is going through law. And as with the short-term rental, sometimes when we're taking things that we think are straightforward and pretty plain English, they think about some things that hadn't occurred to us. So I would rather I would like to continue the discussion of the ordinance, and I think there's other things. And I recall now that I did have an amendment I want to make to the charter amendment. That's the one bringing more to the fore the authority line. But I can do that on my own as a part of the council whenever that gets to it. But this is important. This is important changes, and I think it's important to make sure that our Office of Law has a chance to look at this. So I would encourage, I tend to support these as they're written, or at least the concept, but I do think we might want to wait and hear from them.
Yeah, that's fine. I thought be helpful still to let the committee know
Yep.
the direction I'm trying to go.
I think it's important to talk about because we keep hearing about siloing and all of these other things, and we definitely heard at the Planning Commission from Tom Smith that he had a worry that somehow he was going to be cut out of the forest conservation work after he had spent so many years. Just clearly not the intent and couldn't happen under the current. But I think we need to reassure the staff. These are changes. They're changes in their life, and they need to understand that our intent is to strengthen the process, not shred it or something.
Well, that's precisely why
Sure.
the comments from the Planning Commission, why I wanted to put this together, is because that wasn't my intention, as I spoke with Tom about. And so, this will give us time, too, to see if staff has any comments on them. Okay.
Yeah, I think we need David, Director Gerald here, only because I'm, when I'm stuck on his SOP, and he has a step where the comments are received, and then it moves forward. So I think it's really disappointing that we have to codify this. And maybe you're codifying it because you're speaking of a department now instead of an office, but to have to codify that we should perform a comprehensive review is saying that we're not doing our jobs.
It's already in the code. It's already in the stormwater management code.
So you're just adding this to say department instead
the others because I think it's a good idea.
But I think you're bringing up a good point, Ellie. I'm not sure, and particularly with all the new members on the council, how much people are aware of the whole. I mean, there is a very well-defined, regimented process from concept through final approval. And when Rob and I were going through that, trying to track how everything interleaves, it was reminding me. I don't understand, or I don't know how much of our colleagues really are fully inculcated. You are because of your background. But I think that that's something that is hamstringing this debate because we're kind of talking about things that are inside baseball and fairly technical. And I almost think it would be worth us going through a little flowchart exercise just to show how the pieces and the players fit in along the way from the original concept all the way through to final permit. Mm-hmm. It is rigorous, and it should be.
I do have that written up already. Now you mention it, I forgot to print that out. Because on the West City website, they do have a line outlined, the application procedure, at least for forest conservation. And so I kind of tried to update that to make it clear, but I couldn't find that online for stormwater management, but that is outlined in the code, so I can certainly make that as well.
So your comment about Tom Smith is exactly what I worry about. He's a planner, and he wants that interface, and he's already making a comment that he feels he would feel isolated. So that's a perfect example of what I'm worried about here.
Well, and that's why this resolution, but when you look at the process, there is absolutely no way that either planning and zoning or public works can be excluded or siloed out of the process. They're intimately involved throughout, and so at the very end, when you get the final thing is the grading permit, that is both of them. It would be nice to have the environment have a seat at the table all along. They don't now. And that's really the input,
go back
the emphasis.
To that. I don't know if that's a fair statement. Would you agree with that, Jackie, that along the process here you don't have a seat at the table?
Where's their signature?
With regard to the forest.
Oh, you're talking about a regulatory.
The grading.
Yeah, if you're talking about regulatory authority, no. We are consulted on restoration projects sometimes, but not always. We're involved at the beginning for the grant application and site visits and that sort of thing, and if something goes wrong or problems are being had with the group that's doing the project, then we're consulted. But no, otherwise, no. With regard to the Forest Conservation Act, we're not consulted. And I think that's the point that you're making, Alderman Arnett, that we don't have any sign-off authority. We're not one step along in the process.
That's what's broken. And that's why I'm supporting this department and the ordinance. We need to have, the environment is a critical element, just like engineering is a critical element, like facade design or footprint are critical elements. The environment is a critical element, and it needs to be integrated into the process all along the way.
Right. I agree with that. I agree with that.
Well, what's your idea for how to accomplish that besides this then?
As I said, that we have an Office of Environmental Policy and that we have different skill sets in different departments, and Jackie's responsibility is to make sure that she is heard.
And the way you do that,
I mean, that you know, we're all working towards the same goal and following, I didn't mean to interrupt,
And that's what
I'm sorry.
this would do.
Well, I think actually what David talked about would do it, his standard operating procedures. I thought that was a good sequence of what should happen before there's a shovel in the ground. And, again, we're all working, my concern is the project. When a project comes to us with a defined scope, and it's at that pre-construction time that it's most critical that you get your voice heard. And I don't see why we have to form a department to have your voice heard.
The point's not to have a voice heard. It's to be able to have a voice to enact change, to have the force to be able to do something.
You're going to, so we have an office, so we have a regulatory, so the City of Annapolis, hey everybody, the City of Annapolis has an environmental regulatory authority. Thank you very much. Whoa. I don't think that's going to be really well received.
What do you mean? We had that for over 10 years,
Yeah,
though.
but I just don't understand why it's not working well now.
And it was extremely well received when
we disbanded it.
When Ellen Moyer set this up. Well, it was an experiment look, you said use the scientific method, I think, in your email to Betsy, and I'm trying to describe to you some failures and shortcomings, and so using the scientific method, you have to think about how do you respond to that, right?
Well, it's a step by step. I think acutely.
I don't think a simple SOP is going to provide any kind of teeth or strength to accomplish the goal or the change we're looking for.
You need an SOP, regardless if you're the department or an office. You're going to need a standard operating procedure.
I think positions
so are you
taken, they're not going to change.
Yeah.
Well, what is the committee's desire on this? Should we?
I mean, you can vote.
I would like to.
Do you want more time to go through it? Is that what I'm hearing?
To wait until we get the Office of Law version of those. Also, we are talking about 1.5 inches of paper, and I would be lying to you if I've told you that I've gone through all 200 pages of it blow by blow. Now, maybe you can come back and say, you've had plenty of time to do that, Alderman Arnett.
No, but that's why I deliberately did not include any kind of policy changes in that. All it does is change department responsibilities and the name, and the reason, again, it's so big is because it moves the code from one title to another title. So I assure you, because even Linda Shute at the time was writing it, and she had some other things in there about wanting to make corrections, because there's a lot of code that needs to get just stricken, but again, I didn't want to muddy the waters, so I took all those out. I said, no, I just want to keep it simple so my colleagues can trust me that I'm not trying to sneak anything into these 110 pages.
Right.
I don't expect you to just take my word for it,
but trust but verify.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, well, so we'll essentially table that as Ms. Green. And I think that concludes our agenda if there's any other motion.
I move we adjourn.
It's longer than I hoped.
Either that or we start bringing booze into the chamber.
I second that one.
I second. Is there a second?
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Environmental Commission. I hope Diane didn't want to speak. I forgot to. I should have asked.
Well, she didn't want to speak that bad.